Holler if you hear me, and welcome to tonight's edition of Uncensored. It is the top of the hour, 10 p.m. Eastern, and we are here together to finish page 20 to issue 7 of my comic book, Encrypted. Here we go. And we're going to be going on and bringing down here a moment that really goes out there to show you the big twist or the big, revelation of what it is that Fiona's been looking for in this issue. What is the importance of this castle that the whole story's been set in? What is it that brings all these people, all of these affluent aristocrats and politicians and all that to come all the way out to this castle in the middle of nowhere in the Pyrenees Mountains? Well, there's a little secret that also explains where exactly all those feathers came from and all the different portraits she's seen around these rooms. Yeah, why are they all decorated in feathers? Well, they're not bird feathers. They're more like, a little something, a little right here. Oh, yeah, a little right here. So something to do with this little figure right here that makes the fake inclusive leftists screech in fear at the sight of this, in case you wonder why they want to vicariously live through vampires so much. Yes, as in the dungeon of this castle has an angel that they captured years ago, actually a century ago, and have been physically and sexually torturing this angel for years, ripped the wings off its back, and now have been harvesting the feathers to either frame family portraits, as well as things like using it for using old-fashioned quill feather pens like that. Yes, and if you are elite enough, and if you are sworn in enough to the hedonistic blackmail of this sick, demented, rich family, merchant family in Spain that's in charge of this castle that had it built centuries ago, well, your reward is that you get to have your little turn going full Weinstein on this angel they captured. Mainly on account of how these sick perverts, who already were deranged perverts, then glommed onto the fiction of the Marquis de Sade as their religion that was so much more pure and real and true than Christianity or Judaism or even Islam, and all have that, to the point where even they look down their nose at Satanists under the idea of that even Satanists are still following a Christian concept and, Christianity equals evil. Because, well, basically they are how Hollywood screenwriters write people that you're supposed to cheer for. And, well, this is all we got to say about that. But then again, not watching their self-indulgent, woke, masturbatory drivel, especially if it has the names Ryan Murphy or Alan Ball attached to it these days, well, people have not been watching that crap anymore, despite how much them working for Disney-funded streaming services or networks or all that have kept on deficit spending to keep giving them what it is they want, even though what they want doesn't actually produce ratings anymore. And on the opposite end of that, somebody who was actually creatively talented and creatively distinctive, who wasn't just giving you social justice masturbatory fantasies, who actually had a story that was unique, that gave you a style of story and a style of characterizations and drawing comic art and all that actually was marginalized and that found its way into the mainstream through being able to go and prove his talent to the right people with the right connections. You have recently this week the passing of Sam Keith, a comic artist who had spent a decade plus grinding through the underground and through small press comics, including having worked in the early days of Comico. That was a second-party publisher that had a big expansion in the late 80s, only to collapse under the weight of its own mismanagement and not paying its talent and all that. And from there, Sam Keith is able to make the hop, skip, and the jump into being one of the original artists in the very earliest issues of The Sandman, and his, art, like with every other self-indulgent post-Alan Moore narcissistic Brit Bong bitch, the artists that they're able to hire, whether they are mainstream type of people or if they are somebody that's more, on the margins or whatever, and giving them work, well, if it's actually based on talent, not based on some imaginarily marginalized, minority group or whatever, that they're being hired to draw for representation, and the best they draw is Steven Universe fan art drawn by a pedophile who just escaped the asylum, well, that's where you get Sam Keith in those first 3 issues, I think actually 4 issues of The Sandman, being involved there as the artist, and he wound up on the back of catching attention from doing that. He got the attention from Jim Lee, who then brought him on as one of the first titles that Image Comics published outside of the original, well, the 6 original comics they published out of the original 7 creators, on account of how the 7th artist, Will Portacio, was dealing with a death in the family. So that's why his comic, Wet Works, didn't get published until 1994, even though all the other Image guys started their titles in 92. But, you know, family problems and all of that, I perfectly understand. You know, that's a lot more understandable than people like Dan Slott or Mark Waid having violent outbursts where they're threatening death upon people who dare go to church and vote Trump instead of go to Antifa rallies and rape little kids at public schools. But Sam Keith, like Dale Keown, although, well, at least with Sam Keith, you have somebody who simply was just a very, very self-critical, perfectionist kind of artist who, you know, was somebody that also was very reclusive from the public exposure. No wonder he was somebody that could only last on such a short time of only just a few issues of working with the perpetually self-promoting, the perpetually manipulating to glom onto whatever established successful figures he can to constantly promote himself. Like Neil Gaiman was somebody that a guy like Sam Keith, who would rather do the work and not constantly be a publicity whore. Now you know why they didn't really get along, and why in those early issues of the Max, you even have a little underhanded fuck you to the Sandman in her throwing shade at the character of Death in the Sandman comics, and about how Death is not some cute goth girl that teenage boys can masturbate to if they're sad about not being on the football team or whatever. You know, that kind of crap. Although I always appreciate Sam Keith and his collaborator William Mesner-Loebs for that, because, you know, that as opposed to how much people like Alan Moore and Warren Ellis have that idea of how they are such, you know, great, brilliant, woke type of progressives and how they're so collectivist and all that. But in actuality, more often than not, through actual, you know, listening to these assholes and how they present their work, it's all about them, and any collaborator they have really is just there to do their Bolshevik bidding. But then again, that's the rules for thee, but not for me. Like how any sort of aid that rich pricks like with Code Pink or with Francis Coppola and all that have been giving aid and support and public defense to the country of Cuba in their communist regime. All that aid winds up getting intercepted by the government, who then can go and indulge themselves. But Sam Keith, on the other hand, was about the work, and was one of the very, very rare examples of those Image artists in the 90s, whether it was one of the founding artists or whether it was the second wave of people that they brought on because they liked their work and wanted to publish their own stuff. They were pretty much Sam Keith, between what he was doing creatively and him actually having a work ethic, was the exact opposite of someone like Dale Keown. Where Dale Keown, for the longest time, may have not been somebody that there was a lot of public information about, but also, as we've seen now in him emerging into the whole, you know, online comic book scene, yeah, what a sad, exploited man that he has become. And, well, his artistic skills may still be there, but by God, has he made such a sad ass of himself on account of being so desperate to fuck some impersonator of Kim Basinger in 8 Mile, as well as all the alcohol abuse. With Sam Keith, on the other hand, he went there. And while so many of those Image artists that were the big founding artists that are much bigger names than a guy like Sam Keith, they wound up not being able to go, and even with the speculator boom giving them so much more public exposure and getting them into the public eye in a way that they would not have done before, a lot of them did not really wind up getting that multimedia appeal. You know, like Spawn did in the 90s with Todd McFarlane putting his own money and hanging his balls out there creatively and business-wise to form McFarlane Toys and get toys of his own characters out there, which also did the work of getting toys of Youngblood and Wildcats, and even, I believe, the Max himself got a toy made of him on account through McFarlane Toys. And besides that, the Max also went and got a radio drama. Yes, a radio drama of the Max that was adapted in the comic book stories, exactly like that Fantastic Four radio show from back in the 70s that featured a pre-Saturday Night Live Bill Murray voicing the Human Torch, or the Howard the Duck radio show where a young Jim Belushi voiced Howard. You had that. And also, of course, probably a lot of people outside of the 90s comic book type of fans would know of the Max, probably more likely from the cartoon on MTV. That was one of those few other cartoon shows on the Liquid Television anthology series they did that went from Liquid Television to getting its own show. You had the Max, right up there alongside 90s cartoon, hallmarks for MTV, Beavis and Butthead, and Eon Flux. And then there was the Max. All three of those started as liquid television segments that then became major long-running stays for them. And although at the same time, probably due to, the Max being something that our friend Sam Keith actually owned the copyright to, it was a matter of he did not want to go out there and be as greedy about it or as having to go and be promoting in public about it. So that's why it appears that if you try to track down that run of the Max, it is difficult as hell to try to find in-print trades of it. Because the most recent thing they did was not too long ago, there was a Max and Batman crossover I saw heavily promoted and printed out there. But that is, even though the Max was a comic from the 90s where they had these huge print runs for these early Image titles, it is, like this, the clockwork where you have the ticking going on in your mind, looking for the Max and back issues or in trades, and it's expensive, almost as expensive as trades or back issues of Avatar Press titles, now that Avatar Press is pretty much defunct without officially announcing that it's been defunct. And in honor of that, there was over at the Liberty Comics, which it happening to be New Comic Book Day today. There was the thing also that I already talked about how it was the work on the Sandman. That's probably what led to Sam Keith winding up with creating the Max. But then before that, there was work he did as a cover artist for a long time for Marvel Comics Presents, that anthology series they did twice a month. That's famously where the Weapon X comic that was published through for 8 months of that, or 6 or 7 months of that. Well, also there was a little recurring Wolverine story that Sam Keith drew with the collaboration of Peter David, actually. Peter David, in the middle of still doing his run on the Hulk, did this alongside Sam Keith, and this was, you can tell it's an edition from the 2000s or so, because in the back they credit all the Marvel Enterprises people, and you see Avi Arad. Back when, Avi Arad was still the major figure out there that was in the company brass at Marvel, that was alongside Stan Lee trying to convince studios to, produce cartoons and movies and all that. And just take a good long look at a little something like this. And that, most definitely you can see why this guy stands out like he does. Presented, it was serialized across 8 issues of Marvel Comics Presents, where they would do it for I think 4 or 6 or 8 pages or so. And there's almost the hilariously demented level of caricature that he has in his drawing style that can either go for psychological horror or go for a cartoonish exaggeration that becomes silly. You know why his work and his comic art was so easy to successfully translate from the comic book page into the cartoon in a cartoon form. And now pretty much the exact opposite of what they did with the Spawn comic book, where you look at Spawn and then you look at that HBO show, and you can tell how many liberties they took with that compared to the Spawn comic book as everybody actually knows it for. But then again, that's one of the many things we're talking about. We've got RJ in the chat here. No, so we got Nick coming in here early to say, have fun in the stream. All right there, that's nice. But besides that, RJ brings up, Satanists make me laugh because not only do they believe indirectly in the religion they hate, but worship a guy that will manipulate them and punish them for manipulating them. Yes, they hate God, so they're Satanists, although Satan himself is a creation of God, an angel of God, and a Christian concept anyway. So, just they're not the smartest people. They're not the brightest bulbs in the pack. I mean, just look at Styx Hexenhammer, as we've been seeing. And the second a little flip through of our body cam footage I did now is past it's 2.2K views, and I'm still getting people who are pissing and moaning in defense of this freak, of this loser, of this completely fallen excuse for a man. And that's what's so funny, where, when it comes to one of those times where the quartering of all people is becoming a little bit more positively received on the internet was when he made a social media post of, sending his prayers out to Styx Hexenhammer. And Styx's response was to be a conceited, arrogant prick who tells him, but basically to tell him off and about how, oh, I don't need your prayers. But remember, this was the same guy who I showed you. The caption there on the little like main bar of his channel, on that channel, is saying, I am God. No, you're not. I mean, if I were as more current year focused in the type of stories I rather draw, I would wind up going and drawing Styx Hexenhammer into into Encrypted right now. Considering the big, although right now we've got the big twist, right? We're doing right here, the big climax. We haven't quite done the final big moment, the real ending of the story. But I wouldn't dirty my artwork by referencing Styx Hexenhammer in there. Just saying. But lucky for me, a while back, and I've had these back issues since Florida. I kept seeing in different comic shops and conventions all kinds of long boxes in like the dollar bins or whatever that had this issue 1 right here. And I thought, well, okay, I'll take a look at it. And the store I went to happened to have the first 4 issues here in back issue form. So I went, well, all right, let's check it out. A little bit right there, a little nice little Frank Rosetta kind of. I could see this out of context being a good Playboy cartoon that done in the back pages of the magazine, one of those full page editorial cartoons they would do. This one, and I believe the comic ran for about 34 issues or so. I don't remember exactly. I know it ran longer than probably any other 90s Image title would have expected to be that isn't the Savage Dragon or Spawn. But at the same time, yeah, it was also Sam Keith actually had that work ethic to be able to go and go and go and keep on, making the comic. So there weren't, 7-month long gaps between issues, like say with Dale Keown doing Pit. Let's see. Yeah, it was issue 1 was March 93, and issue 1 of Pit was January 93. And then, like I said, issue 2 is cover dated July 93. And it ran for about 5 years, and it only did 20 issues. They were only able to do 20 issues, Dale Keown of Pit, across 5 years. Even with getting Steve Gerber of Howard the Duck fame to go and help him as his co-writer on that, and still, he could barely get 20 issues. And then March 93, the last issue is cover dated August 98, and 35 issues. Okay, so it's 35 issues. Still, well, in that time, a lot more productive than other people I could name of or could think about. But let's see. And also, our friend Good Bad Flicks brought up the Max in one of his top 5, TV shows, videos. And the Max was even put in the thumbnail, so it's easy to remember. The 5 Forgotten list. Yeah, he has his own playlist. So far, this has become, over the past 4 years, this has been like a relatively newer series for his show, for his channel, because he's been ongoing, doing this, over and over and over again. Oh, here it is. MTV's Experimental 90s Programming. That's the one that has the Max. Here we go.
When I used to think about taxes, I would just cringe. I used to use a C
to his head and needs his.
I want my MTV.
I want my MTV. Call your cable company and say I want my MTV.
80s MTV was dominated by music videos, and 90s MTV was dominated by some of the most experimental but also incredibly enjoyable programming. Shows like Beavis and Butthead and Liquid Television were so unique and could not have existed anywhere but MTV in the 90s. The mixture of popular music and bizarre shows helped to keep MTV relevant, which changed when MTV decided to go with non-stop marathons of ridiculousness, but that's a whole other story. There was a ton of content they put out back then.
And there's the Max right there. Like I said, look at that page. I mean, look at that frame right there. And then let's just, stick with the covers. And there we go. The cover where I don't have to look at the Max's ass, which is Well, so issue 1, issue 2 with our blonde right there. And also the Jaguar down there as well. Yeah. It's not the one of the guy's ass. Here we go. Look at that, and it's almost 1-to-1. And that's amazing. It makes me wonder, like, what type of like top flight animation studio they got to work on there. Because and remember, that was the same time where, like I said, Eon Flux also started as segments on Liquid Television that then became its own show. But that had, Peter Chung behind it, who had already built up, a reputation in the animation business from getting started in the 80s, working under Ralph Bakshi as like a guy who was, eager to get work, and then built up a name where then he wound up working as a production designer on other shows. He actually he directed the opening title scene of the 80s Ninja Turtles cartoon. Yes, that's him. And then he also worked doing production design on Rugrats and animated the opening credits of that as well. And further it went until he also wound up being the main man behind the Phantom 2040, which is a great futuristic legacy type of superhero show that was of the Phantom that is before Batman Beyond, and I would say better than Batman Beyond, but it was made before even the Billy Zane movie was out there. And what's especially interesting is that then after that was where he went and made our little friend known as Eon Flux.
And sadly, some of them just didn't get the views they needed to survive. Here's 5 shows from the very experimental age of MTV that you may have missed or forgotten about. The Head. The Head was originally an 11-minute short that MTV ran during their animation weekend in August of 1994. It was about a guy who wakes up one morning to discover that his head is big, ridiculously big. He finds out that an alien named Roy moved into his head and needs his help to stop an invasion from another group of parasitic aliens. The show was created by Eric Fogel, who at the time had just graduated from NYU. He created an animated short called Mutilator, which caught the attention of the executives at MTV Animation. Their animated stuff was taking off, and they were looking for something weird to turn into a series. The pilot for The Head went over well, and MTV decided to make it part of their new upcoming animation block they call.
And hello to Weatherman. Nice to see you back. He's got a bad migraine and a cold. Oh, shit. Well, Weatherman, I hope that the other copy of issue 2 being shipped out is going to make up for that, because I not only shipped out a copy of issue 2, but also plenty of other comics in there as little surprises for you. Yeah, we're just looking at this video right now because it's talking about MTV programming in the 90s. And I don't know if you remember that MTV cartoon, The Max, that was based off of that one Image comic right there. That I'm bringing up because the creator of The Max actually died not too long ago. Like he was pronounced dead this Monday. So, well, now it's a matter of respecting him and honoring his skill and he's a guy who, for as unique and as skilled and as disciplined as he is, all the things that he was all of the some things that Ethan Van Sciver is not. But now you know why, all the more reason he deserves a lot more attention than any of those idiots right there, the usual gang of idiots over there, will ever deserve. And Weatherman confirms, yes, I watched The Max. Well, I knew of the cartoon but didn't watch it, and then later on I came across The Max and I was able to get the first 4 issues of it, and have had those since living in Florida. So it's a big thing I've always, kept around and cherished. And going to Liberty Comics up the road, routinely when going through their, the shelves of trades for like Marvel and DC stuff, there was this little, old used trade for that Wolverine story Sam Keith drew before creating The Max or working on the early issues of Sandman. And we've got this right here. And yeah, look, remember the look of The Max, and then look at that Wolverine right there. Oh, yeah. Although considering the red eyes with the Wolverine mask and all that, if you took away the claws, this would also look like Sam Keith drawing Shadowhawk. If you remember, if anybody else remembers Shadowhawk. Yeah, I actually went and Weatherman to apologize for being late with shipping the second copy of issue 2 to you, I went and got multiple copies, multiple comics from my own long boxes as an apology. It's very, you can tell that his style had already was showing up fully formed with before he created the Max. And maybe also the fact that he had to deal with, I believe, someone else inking him, or him just being a hired hand for the self-indulgent trip to Neil Gaiman's ego that was the Sandman. Now you know why he walked away after just, like, I think 3 issues of that. And why in one of those issues of the Max that I have, he went and didn't do, he went and directly insulted the Neil Gaiman. So yeah, well, then again, all the more reason to tell Gaiman to go fuck himself. Yes, totally maxed out. Maxed out like a credit card that opened by my father. Because I still get multiple letters in the mail from creditors and debt collectors between, the multiple credit cards he had from Chase and other credit cards over there.
Called MTV's Oddities. The show followed what was set up in the pilot, but expanded the scale. They introduced a bunch of human abnormalities, like a guy with a lawnmower blade stuck in his head, that joined in the fight against the Gorks. The show premiered on December 18th, 1994, less than 6 months after the pilot aired. MTV even put out a short promotional video to show how they were able to outsource the animation for a faster turnaround. They also highlighted some of the problems with outsourcing, like animation frames not lining up properly. The first season ran for 13 episodes, including the pilot. The episodes were each 11 minutes long, and they merged 2 of them together for airing. So even though there are technically 13 episodes, there was only 7 shows. It was a modest hit and was renewed for a second season. There was a long gap between the seasons. Season 1 ended in January of 1995. Season 2 aired February 6th, 1996. With Season 2, they expanded the episodes, so now each one was 21 minutes, instead of 2 episodes merged together. Well, except for the first show back, which was an 11-minute recap of Season 1. Even with the gap in the seasons, the show was doing okay ratings-wise, but it was still canceled. The last episode aired on February 27th, 1996. The show was John DiMaggio's first voice acting job. He's since gone on to be one of the most successful voice actors in the business, with 2 of his best-known roles being Bender from Futurama and Marcus Phoenix from Gears of War, on top of hundreds of other shows. Eric Fogel continued to work for MTV Animation and created the very successful Celebrity Deathmatch series. The head was released on
Well, I'm guessing he found bigger success later on. Sort of like when Adam Sandler was in Airheads, which bombed at the box office. Then the next year, he stars in Billy Madison. That does well, and then that winds up leading to Airheads becoming a bigger hit on TV airings and rentals.
DVD, but only as part of Amazon's burn-on-demand service and is no longer available. You can purchase both seasons on Amazon's Prime Video, though. The Max. The Max was a comic that was created by Sam Keith and...
Yes. And also to make a correction, Sam Keith was an artist on the first 5 issues of the Sandman, not the first 3. But you see right there, let me get it. There we are. Oh, because I am that amazing.
Distributed by Image in 1993. While many of Image's comics at the time were superheroes in tights fighting each other, the Max was a big standout. Outside of the obvious being a very striking and unique art style, the core concept was far removed from other books like Youngblood. The Max was about a character who exists in...
Mainly because the Max actually had a concept. Unlike Wildcats or Youngblood, but they did have nice-looking art. I mean, you're looking at somebody right here who does have all of the original Jim Lee issues of the Wildcats in back issue form. Yeah, he was the artist on the first 14 issues of that. I was able to track them all down. I even have that trade they did of the first 4 issues of Wildcats that was done. I've got that. I was actually interested in that Wildcats compendium that DC published, but then looking through them, you look at the pages of the original 4 issues, and they did that thing where they digitally recolored it. Yeah, that thing they've done, but that's rapaciously ruined a bunch of older comics, like with certain printings of Neil Adams' Batman, or with they did that with the Inkall, that one big French comic that Mobius drew with Alejandro Jodorowsky writing. There's like newer editions that recolor that digitally. And also, I remember like 2010 or so, like around the time of when the Thor movie came out, they went and reprinted in like 5 volumes in 5-volume trades, the Walt Simonson Thor run, which they did the digital recoloring shit there. It looked so ugly compared to what I'd heard about the original stuff. I actually tried to get the Walt Simonson Thor by tracking it down in back issue form.
2 worlds, the real world and the outback, which more or less resembles the outback of Australia, but is referred to as an alternate reality. In the real world, the Max is a homeless man who spends time with Julie, a freelance social worker. In the outback, the Max is a hero who protects the Jungle Queen Julie from the evil Mr. Gone, a serial rapist who has targeted her. The Max fights him in both worlds. The animated series was another entry in MTV's Oddities block. The show premiered on April 8th, 1995. Much like The Head, the show is comprised of 2 11-minute episodes. The show covered roughly the first year of the Max comics. They introduced the main characters and followed the various storylines. The animation for the show was very well regarded. It was a mixture of a bunch of different styles, from cartoony to incredibly detailed hand-drawn animation. It was nominated for Best Animated Program in 1995. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, the show was canceled after its first season. It's unclear as to if this was due to the expense of the show or just a lack of viewership. The last episode aired on June 19th, 1995. The comic series continued for years, and if you can, I highly recommend giving them a read. The show was released on DVD, and like The Head, it was burn on demand. The DVD has all the episodes, including commentaries for each. The DVDs are still available.
And to confirm that, because this was a few years ago, when looking it up, yes, I went to Amazon to see, what was the availability of the Max, and it turns out, yeah, the easiest thing to do is to just watch the episode, is to get the DVD of the cartoon. Because I don't know why, but I'm guessing it's just been out of print, or there was some sort of like contractual argument now, because I saw that, yeah, nowadays the newer stuff of the Max or newer printings of the Max were done via IDW instead of Image.
Or you can also purchase them digitally from Amazon. Dead at 21. Dead at 21 was a very, very experimental live-action show from MTV. The first episode premiered on June 15th, 1994. It was about Ed, played by Jack Noseworthy, who wakes up on his 20th birthday to discover that when he was a child, he was part of a botched experiment. He has a microchip installed in his head that makes him hyper-intelligent, but it'll also kill him when he turns 21. He's being chased by an agent for the company, and he joins up with a young girl named Maria to try to get some answers as well as prevent his death. The show had a music video look to it, which was fairly unique at the time. Music videos weren't unique on MTV, but using the style in a narrative program was. This felt like the right blend of hip show for the younger crowd mixed with technobabble. Think Hackers if it was about life and death. Each episode was a half-hour long and filled with some of the more popular music at the time. The show ended on a cliffhanger, which proved they were planning on more episodes, but the show only lasted 1 season with 13 episodes. The last episode aired on September 7th, 1994. The show has never been released on any sort of home media, and because of all the music involved in the show, it most likely never will. Figuring out the rights to each song and doling out the royalties accordingly would be far too expensive to do. A few of the episodes are available on YouTube, but some of the audio is muted, which makes it a tough watch. There are other places out there who have the whole series, though. Undressed. Undressed, or MTV's Undressed, was...
Well, I wanted to really show you the Max part. Now let's go and show you one from another story that I think we all would agree on being great.
Award-winning PPE for healthcare and industrial workers that's so comfortable and so protective.
And really, she was just In the late 80s, writer-director Dennis Feldman was working on the sci-fi comedy project Real Men when something occurred to him. While doing his research, he thought to himself that any extraterrestrials traveling through space wouldn't be doing so in giant spaceships, or big tin cans as he called them. It was far too distant to travel in the way that we humans have perceived as travel, so he figured they would do it another way, by information. He started talking to scientists and was able to gather all sorts of information about different theories of alien life and space travel. He began writing a treatment about how an alien species would send instructions to Earth on how to encode DNA to create one of them on our planet. He called this treatment The Message. Later, Feldman was working on the movie A Cast of Killers with Frank Mancuso Jr. for Paramount. He let him read the treatment for The Message, but couldn't get the studio interested in producing. Initially, it was about a scientist who had his project scrapped by the government agency he works for. He takes this information, and as a bathtub geneticist, he creates the alien himself. His creation escapes, so he convinces a biologist and a police officer to help him track it down. He felt the idea had some credibility issues, so he reworked the entire thing. Feldman then decided to expand the story further in what is called a spec script. A spec script is when you're writing an original script and aren't being paid to do so. Most spec scripts are filled with some of the most interesting and unique ideas because the writer is making it to please themselves and not trying to cater to a studio's whims.
Which will sounds like what, 90% of modern screenplays are, except they're catering to the studio's whims on behalf of BlackRock.
He wanted this to be more hard sci-fi, so he met with scientists at UCLA to discuss the reality in what he was creating. While there, he also studied the scientists themselves as he planned on using them as characters. After speaking with them for some time and discussing the origins of life in the universe, they directed him to speak with the people working at SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. He went to see the enormous radio telescope, the Arecibo Observatory in Arecibo, Puerto Rico. The telescope is constantly scanning for transmissions from intelligent civilizations in our galaxy as a way to answer the age-old question, are we alone in the universe? While this was fascinating, he also found it quite scary. He said, maybe we shouldn't be broadcasting where we live to life forms that might prey upon us. Feldman met with the scientists working at the Human Genome Project to learn the fundamentals of how genetics worked. He took all of this information and worked it into what he felt was a very solid spec script. With the spec script written, Feldman spoke again to Frank Mancuso Jr., who decided to help him produce the production since he was no longer at Paramount. They pitched the idea around, and after a while, it started to get some major attention. This started a bidding war where 5 studios were all interested in buying the script. Feldman ultimately chose MGM because they were the only studio that looked like they would fast-track this into production. The other studios were looking to buy the script, and, as what often happens, they sit on it and may or may not ever produce it. MGM had a lack of content at the time, so for them to get this underway seemed like a good thing. Although in the early 90s, things were a little rough at MGM. The once prominent studio had fallen from grace after a series of missteps, and in 1992, they almost went bankrupt. Through a string of loans and redirection, they were able to save the company. MGM needed a hit, and they thought a big sci-fi production might help return them to the status of a renowned Hollywood studio. This was before MGM's release of Stargate, which wouldn't come out until late 1994 and would go on to be a massive hit for the studio. The biggest decision now was who would helm the production. Mancuso wanted a director that was outside the usual genre choices. He wanted someone who would bring something new to the production, not a director who was on their 6th or 7th genre film. Michael Marcus, the president of MGM at the time, showed the script to his friend, director Roger Donaldson. Donaldson was known for directing dramatic action films like No Way Out and the remake of The Getaway. He had never done a sci-fi film before. Right before this, Donaldson told his agent to be on the lookout for potential jobs that would require lots of special effects. After seeing the amazing effects in Jurassic Park, he was looking to do something outside of his comfort zone and learn more about this new technology. Donaldson loved sci-fi, and the script for this was something that interested him on another level. He had just recently read about SETI and thought it was a really interesting thing to make a movie about. Donaldson met with Feldman, and the first thing he wanted him to do was rewrite the script. There were some things he felt were a bit of a problem, as well as things they wouldn't be able to do within their budget. One day, Donaldson was at a comic book store with his son when he saw the H.R. Giger book, The Necronomicon. The book was a collection of the artist's early works, one of which was what inspired Ridley Scott on Alien. He paged through it and thought, this is who needs to design the monster for his film. Donaldson presented the book to Mancuso and Marcus, who agreed. Even though they bought the script and hired a director, the studio still hadn't officially greenlit the production. Mancuso thought if they were able to get Giger on board, it would be the final push they needed to get the go-ahead from the studio. Giger didn't agree until they assured the artist that his concepts would be fully realized in the best possible light. With Giger on board, the studio officially greenlit the film, and the production was underway. Jurassic Park cost about $65 million. MGM was budgeting this more in the $20 to $30 million range, but they had expectations for the effects to be on Jurassic Park levels. At some point, the script was retitled from The Message to Species. The director and producers met with Giger in Switzerland, and he was very excited to work on the film. In the past, his designs were mostly used to make male aliens, while if you look at his designs, he draws things nearly 90% female. So this would be his first chance to use his talents to create a female monster in film. He said that in the past, after Alien, Hollywood had been after him to design monsters.
And well, yes, bunch of 401 and retirement pirates using our money to control media to force agendas on us. Absolutely correct. And well, they don't want to hear that because, well, leftists and the truth, they are mutually exclusive. It's like garlic and vampires.
Monsters with ugly faces and horrible teeth. He wanted the monster for Species to be scary, but also a beautiful, powerful, and graceful female. He called this Beauty in the Beast. Giger designed Syl in his famous biomechanical style, but wanted it to be different from the xenomorph in Alien. He designed her to be transparent, which was going to be difficult for obvious reasons. The idea of a transparent being was something that had always been a part of Giger's work, but he's fought every single filmmaker over this detail. When he presented this to the designers for Species, he was told it was too expensive, and the only way they could do it was through computer effects, which just weren't there yet. Giger insisted it was possible, and along with his team of artists in Zurich, built a transparent model of Syl. He even commissioned the team at CFX Creature Effects to build a transparent head of Syl using his specs. All of this he paid for out of his own pocket. The artist found two people who would be the foundation for Syl. He took the cast of a 6'2" woman for the body and a Swiss model for the head. He showed his creation to the producers in LA, and even though they were rough designs, they impressed the studio enough to agree with Giger on this. Over the next few months, Feldman presented 8 drafts of the script until Donaldson was finally happy with it. He was trying to fix some of the internal logic and clear out any potential plot holes. With every rewrite, it moved away from being hard sci-fi and closer to something more mainstream. It was about a lab that learned via information from space about how to create an alien species on Earth. In order for the creature to survive in our environment, it would need to be mixed with human DNA. The alien escapes, and a team of scientists have to find it before it can reproduce. The theory was that when an invasive species is introduced to a foreign environment, the dominant one survives by outbreeding the natives. With every draft, Giger became worse.
So basically what Muslims do and what have they been doing in EU countries and in America since Obama and the EU all been planting them in their countries.
To him, it sounded like they were borrowing more and more ideas from Alien. He expressed his concerns, but they told him not to worry. They were looking into casting the film and had a major star interested, Arnold Schwarzenegger. At the time, they didn't have a budget big enough to afford the actor, and while they considered looking to get more funding, they ultimately decided against it. Pierce Brosnan was also up for a role in the film, but took something else. Rather than banking the film on a star, they decided instead to focus on a group of character actors that were all reliable and somewhat known, but not movie stars. That way they could take the lion's share of the budget and put it towards the effects. This attracted the attention of Ben Kingsley, who they hired to play Xavier Fitch, the head of the project. Getting Kingsley involved was a huge step towards legitimizing the production. Having an Oscar-winning actor on board so early made the studio take notice and gave them more leeway. Donaldson's previous...
An Oscar-winning actor who also had a lot of alimony to pay. In case you're wondering why an acclaimed actor like Ben Kingsley would say yes to stuff like, this, or Blood Rain, or The Love Guru, look at how many times he's been married, and that's your answer.
Film was The Getaway, in which he worked with Michael Madsen. When working on the film, Madsen spoke to the director and told him how he was always being cast as a bad guy. Donaldson and Madsen got along very well during the production, and after filming, Madsen said, "Wouldn't it be nice if you could find a heroic role for me?" A while later, Donaldson sent him the script.
Well, besides Species, the only other thing that people know Michael Madsen for, where he wasn't a criminal or a freak or anything, was being the adoptive dad of the main kid in Free Willy. Yeah, I remember he was in Free Willy, and then they brought him back for that first sequel.
Script for Species. Madsen liked it and was cast as the hero Preston Lennox. Mancuso was against this. He didn't think that Madsen could play a convincing hero, but the director stood up for him and knew he could do the job. Donaldson hired him because the character of Press was cynical and sarcastic, just like Madsen. For the rest of the cast, they hired Marg Helgenberger, Forrest Whitaker, and Alfred Molina. Donaldson wanted this cast because, much like him, they weren't the people who would usually do this kind of film. They had a major problem when looking for the alien Syl. Donaldson wanted someone who was striking, a woman who could make everyone stand up and take notice. They held numerous casting sessions and kept falling into the same issue. They either looked great but couldn't act, or could act but didn't look great. Finally, after going through hundreds of auditions, Donaldson asked to expand the search to include models. In walked 19-year-old Canadian model Natasha Henstridge. Henstridge had been modeling since she was 14 years old, but really wanted out. She had told her agent to keep an eye out for movie roles because that was what she wanted to do. This was her third movie audition. She was nervous and admitted she had no idea what she was doing. It was down to Henstridge and two other girls. Donaldson was in her corner, but the studio wasn't. They had a lot riding on the film and weren't sure giving a lead to someone completely inexperienced was such a good idea. Getting the studio to agree with hiring a model with no acting experience to be arguably the most important character in their film was a very tough sell. Many of the executives considered it too risky. Henstridge continued modeling, and they brought her out to LA every so often to do screen tests. Finally, after months of this, they decided to give her the part. Donaldson believed in her, and now after seeing her latest screen test, the studio was warming up to her.
And absolutely positively. The difference being, though, that instead of, a 19-year-old Natasha Henstridge in her first movie, having Somalis and Muslims come in to outbreed white people in European countries or in America in order to have ethnic replacement happen, you take a look at those Somalis and you take a look at those Muslims, and, at best they look like something that you would have to fight in Legacy of Kain. And hello there to Forever, as we're right here now on page 20 to issue 7. This page being the one where we get Fiona storming down into the dungeon of the castle to find and free the angel that they captured, the family that owns this castle. They captured an angel a century ago, and ever since then have been performing blood rituals and random orgies, as well as other ways to go and blackmail rich elites all over Europe. And one of the little rites of passage, when they know they've got people fully blackmailed and in servitude to them, they go and give them the opportunity to go and rape this angel they captured a century ago after ripping its wings off. And that's why all the portraits in the mansion have feathers framing the portraits of various family members of the Amenabars that have been that made and control this castle. They come from the angel whose wings they ripped straight off its back. And apparently it's opening day for baseball. Well, that might explain why when I went grocery shopping earlier today, there was this bucket of big MLB plush baseballs, like teddy bear kind of baseballs that had the Detroit Tigers logo on them.
Donaldson assured them she was the right person for the job. With Silcast, they needed someone to play the younger version of her. They saw a few actresses and hired a then unknown Michelle Williams to play the part. Richard Edlund was hired to be the visual effects supervisor.
And remember, with Michelle Williams, the only other roles she'd had then were bits in commercials and multiple episodes appearing on Baywatch. So when people, I suspect it had a lot to do with her willing to pretend to find Harvey Weinstein attractive, but the fact that you had Michelle Williams, who would eventually go on to have a multi-Oscar nominated career as an actress with her start on Baywatch and a part with no lines in Species, well, hey, There you go. It's not how you start, it's how you finish.
Edlund was a major asset. He worked at ILM on films like Raiders of the Lost Ark and Poltergeist. After finishing his work on Return of the Jedi, he started Boss Films and did effects work for Ghostbusters, Die Hard, Cliffhanger, and many more. Boss Studios was one of the first effects houses to transition between practical effects and CG. In 1993, they were nominated for an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects for their work on Alien 3. His team at Boss Films would be handling the CG for the production. Steve Johnson, who worked on everything from Fright Night to Leviathan to The Abyss, was in charge of designing the prosthetics and animatronics. Johnson was a huge fan of Giger and wanted to make sure the artist was completely happy with what they were doing with his designs.
And Johnson also married Linnea Quigley in real life, as well as being one of the guys that worked on the Tim Burton Nicolas Cage Superman movie that never got made. Like, the thing he's best remembered for that wound up leaking online ever since then was the weird, like, a bioluminescent suit that the Cage Superman was supposed to be wearing that was supposed to help heal him after he was brought back from the dead.
Normally, Giger would have come to the US to oversee things, but at the time, his mother was very sick, and he wanted to stay in Switzerland to be close to her. She was 89, and he feared this would be her last summer. When the artist was young, he said his mother was always there to support him, and he wanted to do the same for her in her final days. As he continued to work on the film, Giger rarely spoke to the director. He was in constant contact with the effects team, sending them faxes of his designs for use in the film, but he felt it was odd with how little he spoke to the director. When he worked on Alien, he had a very close working relationship with Ridley Scott. Giger faxed drawings initially, and then started sending airbrushed paintings. All sorts of designs he hoped they'd be able to use for the creature. He flooded them with content. He did find it frustrating because he had to rely on others who were thousands of miles away to interpret and build his designs. Giger wanted to build the full-size Sill in Switzerland, but the effects team was able to talk him out of it. Norman Cabrera, the special makeup effects artist from Scarecrow's Gremlins 2 and Spawn, sculpted the Sill head. They hired Andrei Barkowiak to be the director of photography. He was just coming off the 1994 blockbuster Speed. They started filming in August of 1994, mostly in and around Los Angeles. For the opening, they hired a cameraman in Australia to do a time exposure of the night sky over the course of several nights. The beginning sequence was filmed in the massive Seal Beach facilities, which is where they built and housed the enormous rockets used during the original lunar missions. The buildings were no longer in use and were being rented out as locations for sets. Early in the film, when Fitch sees something wrong, they had an effect where something was coming out of Michelle Williams' back. When they did the effect, it just showed her hospital gown rising up. The director saw the dailies and thought it looked terrible, so they went back and reshot it with a fake back that they pushed a spike into. The train station was a real station in Utah. The train they used was a classic train in the process of being restored. They built the entire upstairs to suit the scenes they needed. The kitchen on the train was a set. The background when young Sill is in the train was a green screen. Johnson often had lengthy phone conversations with Giger. In some cases, there were problems due to the language barrier. Giger spoke very broken English. When discussing the transformation of young Sill into adult Sill, he said she needed to have pickles coming out of her face. He was very insistent on this. When Sill's first changing, these tentacles, or pickles, popped out of her face. They used a layer of makeup to cover the actress's face that would pull away, and then they hid the wires in post. This was very early digital wire removal. They used the makeup to make young Sill look fatter in the face. This was to show she was growing, but also to help hide the devices and air bladders they had under the makeup. When Giger saw this, he was infuriated. "I said pickles! Pickles!" Finally, they realized what he meant was pimples. By that point, it was too late, and they couldn't redo it. The cocoon, or chrysalis, that Sill's hatched from was made out of garbage bags and KY jelly. They used air compressors to make the thing breathe. They wanted to make the scene unique, so they built the set upside down and flipped the camera to make it look like Sill was falling out, when really, she was just standing up. They had crockpots full of KY to keep it warm, which they poured over a naked Natasha Henstridge. She was leaning down, and they pushed her out of the cocoon. As she was pushed, she stood up and grabbed a trapeze bar they placed out of frame for her to pull up on. Then a quick cut to her standing over the body of the conductor. Ever since he was a child, Giger was fascinated by trains. He had been trying to design a ghost train to put into movies for years. He tried to place it in the infamous Jodorowsky's Dune, but that never happened, and neither did the film. Same with Ridley Scott's The Train. When Giger read the part of the script where young Syl was having nightmares on a train, he thought this would be the perfect time to put his creation in a movie. His concept was a train made out of bones and blood that was chasing after young Syl. The studio didn't want to spend the money, so they told him to skip it. They said they could only do this with CG and would cost well over $600,000. Not one to give up this time, Giger insisted on it being in the movie and started working on it in his studio in Switzerland. He wrote the entire sequence in which the train would move along like a caterpillar, with each segment moving independently and connected by accordion bellows. Vacuum cleaner hoses would extend to suck up younger versions of Syl who was running from it. Behind the train hung rib cages and dead baby Syls. He tried to build this, but it just didn't work. Conceptually, it was fine, but the mechanics couldn't work as the artist envisioned. When MGM found out what he was doing, they asked him to make a small model and send it to the studio. The effects team would then digitize it and animate it within the computer. Giger ignored them and built a large-scale version. Mancuso told him if he was going to do this, to keep it under $100,000. The new model was much better than the first one. He also built a train station and 2 tunnels. The train was a fully functional remote control train with lights and other various moving parts. Giger spent about $100,000 of his own money to put this together with the notion that he would be reimbursed. He then sent the train to the US, and Edlund received it appropriately on Friday the 13th. The effects team loved it, and Steve Johnson said it was so wonderful, he could not see them not using it. The sequence as it was storyboarded was 30 seconds. Giger came up with...
Well, I already said that one way or another, whatever the final issue of the comic's going to be, is going to be a one. It would be one that revolves around 7 stars. So this issue right here, having an angel captured, it only fits.
Many of the deaths in the film, like the tongue death, although many of his ideas had to be either watered down or dropped entirely because they would have given the film an X. Giger's original concept for the tongue death was an unused idea from Alien 3, where the creature's tongue would be comprised of barbed hooks. When Syl kissed a partner that wasn't healthy, she would force her tongue down their throat, grab their innards like a fishhook, and then yank their insides out. He used shark's teeth as a reference and transformed them into Syl's dangerous one-way tongue. The studio decided to go with a kill that was more like the Alien chest burster. Giger was annoyed because he was trying to make things different from Alien, but they just kept veering his designs back in that direction. For the scene where Syl's kissing Anthony Guidera, it took 2 days to shoot. The practical effect was a bloody barbed tongue that was made out of plastic that could be blown up like a balloon. They hid the tongue in the blood pack under the actor's hair and then quickly inflated it for the effect. Then they added additional CG blood spray to enhance the effect. They set up the filming schedule in favor of Henstridge. They didn't have any dialogue-heavy sequences for her early on, so they could ease her into acting. It was mostly set up for her to walk around reacting to what she...
I do believe that I do remember seeing a documentary special on Clive Barker where he goes through a store in LA and finds an H.R. Giger book and praises it. So, yeah. And, well, it wouldn't surprise me if it turns out that Barker did not at least meet H.R. Giger at some point in his life.
Seeing, much like Syl was reacting to this new world she had been thrust into. When Syl's walking through the streets, the director and the director of photography are in the background. This wasn't an intentional cameo. They just needed some people to fill in the background and didn't have any extras available. Henstridge was comfortable being nude, which made it easier for everyone on set. It wasn't a big deal like on some sets where perhaps an actress is doing a nude scene for the first time. With her being a model, she was just used to walking around nude in front of people. Being nude was no big deal, but she was, however, nervous about her first on-screen kiss. She spoke to Alfred Molina, who helped her relax by letting her know that he was nervous too. The only time he had an on-screen kiss was in 1987's Prick Up Your Ears, and that was with a guy. Giger wanted Syl to have 4 distinct stages of evolution. He said when she gets angry, she first becomes red, then orange red, then dark red, and then orange red hot. Her clothes and hair burn off, and on her back there are these sharp spikes coming out. Her body weapons are like red glowing steel. She then cools to a transparent carbonized glass, and you can see her inside bone construction, veins, body organs, and discs. The studio cut the color changes and glowing aspects, which made him sad. He said at times he felt like his suggestions were no longer welcome. He felt the director wanted to make Sill's monster form ugly, and he wanted to make her beautiful. He said, I think he's a great action director, but for the horror
It's like a modern artist going up against modern Hollywood and wanting to make everything ugly.
scenes, he and I did not share the same vision. Donaldson and the studio agreed that the movie needed to be cutting edge in order to compete. Jurassic Park and Terminator 2 had just raised the stakes of visual effects, and they wanted this film to be the next groundbreaking production. That meant they were going to do their best to incorporate practical effects with new digital technology. One of the biggest hurdles was deciding when to use practical effects and when to do CG. CG was still experimental and expensive, so they tried to use it only when 100% necessary. Throughout the film, Sill was to transform from her human side to her alien side. To do this, they wanted to have a full suit made for an actor to wear. They also built a fully animatronic Sill, made of polyester and vacuum-formed plexiglass. As the production moved forward, Giger received the updated script and was concerned over the similarities between species and Alien. He pointed out 5 ideas taken directly from the Alien series. The studio chose to overlook it. The hotel was the Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles. The wedding shop was a real store in LA. The computer lab was a set. For the monster in the cage, once again they used melted garbage bags and KY with an air compressor to inflate it. When the monster breaks out, they had it on a stick which they flung around the room. When it's spinning, it's attached to a drill that...
Oh, there's Weatherman says, okay, I'm going to go lay down. My migraine is killing me. All right, everybody, wish Weatherman a good night. And thank you for your continued support and also your forgiveness for me not sending you the second copy of issue 2 with the packaging I sent. But I hope that, yes, getting issue 2 next week sometime and all those other comics that are going to be coming with it will make up for that. Yes, everybody have a good night right there. Oh, yes, indeed, indeed, indeed. That's the least a man can do who's brought this much support to the channel in spite of all these damn migraines and now especially having this horrible, painful cold. And Weatherman just gifted a channel membership, so that is, well, the great curtain call he gives this time here during the stream. So Mandy 13297 just became a channel member. And yes, a good wave by. Oh, yes. And Forever says, my underwear model X told me the girls at shoots were always buck naked. No one really cared. And, you know, a ton of gay guys. So, well, yeah. I mean, between they're walking around naked like that, but, you know, the weird guys are the ones who aren't gay in the fashion industry, you know, dealing with being behind the scenes like that. So I can understand why they'll, you know, be hopping around like that. Then again, you know, sometimes it can get a little extreme, like, you know, Scarlett Johansson's hypocrisy, where there she is getting groped on live TV by a man, but it's Isaac Mizrahi doing it, so her response is to laugh and giggle when getting her breast squeezed, you know, under that logic that, you know, so men, if men say they're gay, it's okay for them to go and assault and grope women like that? Okay. Makes you wonder what guys and certain guys in Hollywood, what their sexuality really is, and that, you know, oh, the virtue signaling is just a Trojan horse for them to be just as much of a rapist of women as any Polanski or Hugh Hefner.
But they filmed and ran the footage in reverse to give it an unusual look. The club was the Pantages Theater in LA. The bathroom stall was a set, so they could blow out the wall for the scene where the club goer has her spine ripped out. The beach where Sill wakes up was Santa Monica Beach. Sill's sex dream was shot by having 2 actors in bodysuits filmed underwater in a giant tank. The house with the hot tub was a real location in Santa Monica.
Well, in the time since maybe after 2015 or so, that's what Harvey could have said.
Canyon. However, once they get into the hot tub, it switches to a set. The set was a major problem. The water made the hot tub rust, and the tiles started coming off the bottom, which cut the actor's feet. When the actor's thrashing underwater, they glued a partial body Sill puppet to his back and had him make it look like it was holding him down. It took 8 people to control. They had tubes in his mouth, which they pulled out, and then ran it in reverse to make it look like they were going in. They then had a partial life cast of the actor where they shoved more tubes into his mouth than they would have been able to do without actually killing the actor. After Syl leaves the hot tub house, she needed to kidnap someone. They hired an actress for the part, but for some reason, she never showed up. Rather than reschedule the shoot, the director's assistant, Marlee Schneider, stepped up. She was in the Screen Actors Guild and offered to play the part. Henstridge was very nervous about this part. Not the scene where she's completely nude, but the part where she's talking to the woman she abducted. It was the most dialogue she had in the
Yes, that's very true. Women are so dumb saying he is gay. It's all right if he's grabbing my ass. Make it make sense. But then again, women and logic, especially when it comes to modern feminist dogma, like I said, those are mutually exclusive. Like women and accountability. It's like the list of things you'll ever hear a woman say. It's one of those things alongside, I'm sorry, I have no one to blame but myself, or stop eating my pussy so much.
entire film. Thankfully, this was shot later in the production, and she was gaining more confidence in her abilities as the days went on. When she cuts off her thumb, that was a mix of practical and digital effects. She moved her real hand into frame with her thumb tucked down, and they made a prosthetic thumb for her to cut off. Then the digital team made an effect for the new one to regrow. The scene where the car explodes was very dangerous for a few reasons. A major one was this was done during fire season, and they had to get all sorts of permissions to be able to do the multiple explosions. If they didn't have enough precautions, they could start a wildfire. For the black hair, they had Natasha Henstridge wear a wig. Donaldson worked well with Madsen and let him improv some things. He improved this moment, for example. Later in the film, there was a love scene between Madsen and Helgenberger. They asked if they could just improv the whole thing, which the director allowed. They did it in a way that was funny, clumsy, and playful, like a normal half-drunken hookup, rather than a super polished, overly romantic love scene. By doing it this way, it made it more real. While the script was rewritten 8 times, many little details from the first draft remained. In an earlier draft, there was a love triangle between Syl, Preston, and Laura, where the two women were dueling over his affections. While the subplot was taken out, there still were pieces of it that made it into the film. The dream sequence of Syl and Preston, Syl intentionally running into Laura, and Syl following Preston in the elevator, wearing Laura's perfume. The team was having a hard time agreeing on the ending. They had numerous concepts, but no definitive one. The current ending had it so that after Syl was killed, her face would crawl off her head, slide down her shoulder, and mix with someone's arm. This was how the monster would get away and leave the door open for a sequel. Donaldson thought it was too weird, and the studio thought it was too expensive. There was one where Syl cuts herself into multiple pieces, and then each piece forms a new Syl like a salamander. Giger scripted an ending that was an all-out war between Syl and the military. Lots of helicopters and explosions, with a finale in a drive-in theater showing, what else? Alien. Dr. Baker, played by Marg Helgenberger, goes full-on commando and shoots Syl in the head with a rocket launcher. The glowing red-hot baby pours out of the dead mother's chest and slides under a car, which heats up and explodes, killing the baby. Another ending was to have the audience think the alien baby escaped. Then, in an after-credits stinger, they show one of the soldiers pick up the alien baby by its legs and smash it into a wall until it's dead. They told Giger simply no.
That sounds like the wish fulfillment of Lena Dunham now, doesn't it? Smashing a baby against a wall.
Oh, they wouldn't be doing that. Giger hated the fact that they went into the finale with flamethrowers. He said Syl cannot die by burning. It was the ending of Alien 3 and Terminator 2. As he described, Syl gets hot when she attacks, so she would be resistant to fire. On every fax he wrote, no flamethrowers. He faxed them a drawing of a man with a flamethrower between his legs, standing over a woman on all fours, bathing in the flames. He called this Flamethrower Fucker. There was a rumor the crew loved it and put the drawing on a t-shirt. They decided to have the ending be a showdown in a cave underneath the Biltmore Hotel. When they're chasing Syl into the basement of the Biltmore, part of it's the actual location, and then it switches to a set. The underground tunnels were huge sets that were all interlocked. They had them set up so they could be lifted and moved around if needed. Once the pieces were in place, they filled the lower portion with water. In general, it was only about 6 inches deep, which they dyed to make it look deeper. There was a section where it went much deeper, so they could do a scene where Syl jumps out of Fitch. They pulled a board underwater to make it look like something was swimming. The person wearing the full Syl suit was stunt woman and Olympic gold medal winner Dana He, although in many of the shots, it was the fully animatronic puppet Syl. The finale had them fighting the animatronic Syl. After seeing the animatronic in action, Mancuso decided it was too stiff, and the climax of the film would need a fully computer-generated Syl in order to have the look they wanted. Richard Edlund was a 4-time Academy Award winner and was known for constantly pushing the envelope in the field of visual effects. They scanned the physical suit into the computer and made a fully realized digital version they could control. This was very early in the industry. So early, in fact, they were writing the software while they were making it. Edlund controlled the character with a specially rigged puppet, which Donaldson could direct in real time like an actor. They called this new form of puppeteering motion capture. He said the digital Syl puppet is made up of about 10 times the amount of digital information found in the frames of Jurassic Park. One of the reasons the studio agreed to let Syl be transparent was because they could show Syl pregnant with another creature growing inside of her. This created a problem. Syl was supposed to die before the child was born. The ratings board said a pregnant woman and her offspring, no matter how alien, being killed on screen would get them an X. She must have the baby first, and it needs to grow to a substantial size before they were allowed to kill it. They also couldn't show a vaginal birth.
And hello to Nick right there, coming on in on his lunch break as we are showing off this night is the page of what we see Fiona discovering what they've kept in the dungeon for a century of what the Amenabar family has been keeping for a century in this dungeon, which is an angel. Yes, right there. That's what this little gentleman right here is, and right here is, yes, the whole sick, freak, deranged cult religion that the Amenabar family built around the fiction of the Marquis de Sade. Well, it also includes them having captured an angel, ripped its wings off, and now a rite of passage showing that you have now become a part of their little collective is that you get to go and have your way with this angel whose wings they ripped off. And all the feathers around the house, feathers for quill pens and feathers framing family portraits, come from the wings they ripped off.
Or the film would also get an X. They changed it so the alien would come out of the chest of Syl. They took their full-body puppet and cut the chest open for the birth. Again, Giger said this was too close to Alien. He called the baby the chest birther. Through CG, the baby quickly grew to a size big enough where they were allowed to kill it. Giger didn't like the idea of the baby monster. He thought by it being born killed the focus of the movie. He refused to design it, which is why the baby looks so different from the mother. He said if they made the lady and her baby look like red-hot steel, the creatures would look significantly alien enough to where this wouldn't have posed a problem. The studio said, "We can't make her glowing," but they never gave him a reason why. The underground cave sections were all plaster over wireframes. For something like this, they would usually use foam, but because they were using flamethrowers, they had to use plaster or the whole thing would catch fire. Giger objected to the use of flamethrowers. He said fire was a middle-aged weapon used to burn witches. They asked him how he would kill Syl, and he said the best way was to blow off her head. Nobody can live without a head. So they rigged one of Syl's heads to explode, which they filmed at high speed for added effect. When Madsen shoots Syl, originally he was going to say, "Let go, you bitch." But Mancuso objected because that was too close to Ripley's line from Aliens. They sat around for hours trying to come up with something else, and finally decided on,
Let go, you motherfucker.
Madsen wasn't happy with it, but it was the line they decided to use. The cast all got along, although Michael Madsen liked playing pranks on Ben Kingsley. One day he heard Kingsley saying he didn't want anyone touching his chair, so Madsen went out of his way to mess with it. He'd hide it, put garbage on it, and one day he had the grips hang the chair from a crane. Needless to say, Kingsley was infuriated. Kingsley was very serious around all the actors, but was very sweet with Henstridge. He would often chat with her, and she drove him around the lot on her bicycle with him riding on the handlebars. Principal photography ended after 12 weeks, and they picked up a few weeks of second unit afterwards for the stuff with the puppets. It took 6 days to build the oversized rat. Because of all the decision changes over the ending, they were running out of time and had to rush to get it filmed. Originally, there was an extended ending that took place after the rat sequence. It was a small scene where Madsen and Helgenberger are talking on a pier. It was to show their growth as a couple and meant to portray how humanity had survived. It was also one of the elements left over from the love triangle part of the script, showing that Laura won press over Syl. They cut the scene for time, and because they wanted to end the film on the shocker of the rat monster. In the end, the team at Boss produced 57 CG shots for the film and 120 digital matte paintings. Giger designed the titles for the film, which they partially displayed. They got rid of the texture, flipped the E around, and painted it green. The movie was edited by Conrad Buff, who worked on Jennifer 8 with composer Chris Young. He introduced Young to Donaldson, who hired him to do the score. Frank Welker provided the noises for Syl when she was in her alien form. Giger watched an early cut and was shocked that the Nightmare Train wasn't in the film. The studio just didn't want to pay the extra money to put the thing in the movie. Giger started shopping around, speaking to various companies like ILM to see if they could work on the sequence. Finally, Edlin at Boss Studios agreed to shoot the train as a high-speed miniature. They filmed it without the vacuum cleaners and the station. Giger discovered the studio wasn't interested in the sequence as it was envisioned. When all was said and done, it made it into the film for 14 seconds. The studio did reimburse the artist, but only for $50,000. Giger admitted that sometimes he becomes so excited about a project that he loses the ability to make good business decisions. As the film neared completion, Giger sent a fax to Frank Mancuso Jr. He insisted that any bad press the film received would be a result of the derivative elements that he claimed were borrowed from the Alien series. The chest birther, the punching tongue, the cocoon, flamethrowers, and finally, Giger himself. He wanted Species to be special, and felt like the studio was just trying to make a redundant alien. Giger's agent said he worked harder and longer on Species than any film before. Even though he was in Zurich, he stayed in constant contact, either by phone or fax. When the script was changed, which was fairly often, he offered suggestions on how to make it better by adding both depth and true horror. The reasons he was given for leaving his ideas out ranged from it doesn't advance the story or they didn't have it in the budget. Giger said the computer Syl was horribly ugly. To counter this, Richard Edlin said Giger was so happy when the film was first finished. 2 months later, he changes his mind, which is something he has done numerous times before. He did it on Poltergeist 2 and Alien 3. Giger said that wasn't entirely true. He said he loved the suit by Steve Johnson and his team. He just didn't like the CG version. He even faxed Johnson a thank you letter that Johnson framed and hung on his wall. Giger said the animatronic Syl was the best three-dimensional realization of a female Giger creature.
Yes, well, considering Steve Johnson also married Linnea Quigley back in the 90s, maybe now you know why he was so good at being able to sculpt a lady model like this. And why back when the Todd McFarlane movie Maniacs toy line was a thing, I always wanted the one of the Species babe right here, but never got one. Yes, although it was done to promote Species 2, it was still the same design from the first movie. And yes, it still looks great.
Come to life. He even commissioned Johnson to make him a second Syl statue that he could keep at the studio. Giger said it was rare to find a collaborator that he admired, someone who understands the logic of his work. But with Steve Johnson, he felt his ideas were in trustworthy hands. While filming was going on, Giger's mother passed, so he was glad he decided to stay in Zurich to be with her. The studio had a screening for the cast and crew, which went over well, although Natasha Henstridge freaked out. After the film, she ran out of the theater crying, saying how terrible she was. She was still very young, and seeing herself on the big screen was just too much to handle. The executives at the studio were panicking because they had a wave of press conferences in the next few days, and their star attraction for the film was saying how bad it was. She eventually calmed down and was able to do the interviews without freaking out. Henstridge went on the press tour, which was eye-opening for her. She said she didn't even think twice about the nudity in the film. To her, it was no big deal. However, when she was interviewed over the next few weeks, every interviewer seemed to do nothing but focus on her nudity in the movie. They weren't interested in her experiences or her thoughts on the film. They all grilled her about the nudity, which made her more uncomfortable than the actual nudity. When they did the press tour, Ben Kingsley was still mad at Michael Madsen and refused to sit anywhere near him. The two made amends, and they now get along just fine. The studio released the movie poster, which again annoyed Giger. The black background with the egg in the foreground, Giger pointed out, was an obvious copy of Alien. Giger said, "What hurts is the movie poster looks as if I did it myself. If the poster design is bad, and they copy my style, people will think Giger's work is bad. It probably would have cost them less if they had asked me and let me do the poster. It was suggested MGM wanted Giger's name almost as much, if not more, than his designs. The movie was released on July 7th, 1995, and did very well, making $113 million worldwide on a $35 million budget. Audiences loved it, but many critics trashed it, calling it feces. The movie instantly made Natasha Henstridge a household name. Giger really loved Henstridge in the movie. He made her a silver tongue necklace with snake's teeth as a gift. The scene where Syl kills Robbie, the guy from the club, with her tongue, won Best Kiss on the MTV Movie Awards. Afterwards, he asked her on a date, and they went out, only to be robbed at gunpoint during the date. She was terrified and asked him to stay at her place for the evening, but they never went on a second date. After Species, Henstridge started getting offers for movies left and right, and said she jumped on one of the first offers she got, which was for the Albert Pune movie, Adrenaline, Fear the Rush. She said this taught her a valuable lesson, which was to take a bit more care when choosing what to work on. Henstridge worked on the short-lived but cult favorite series She Spies, which lasted 2 seasons, during which they made sure to put in little references to Species. In an ironic twist, at the end of 1995, there was a world tour called The Great Illusion. This was a traveling exhibit commemorating 100 years of cinema. One of the exhibits was Giger's Ghost Train, which the studio initially didn't want and was only in the movie for 14 seconds. With Species being such a hit for the studio, they wanted to make a sequel. Donaldson wasn't interested, so they hired Peter Medak, who, like Donaldson, wasn't someone who normally directed this type of film.
Although he did direct a great little horror film from the 80s called The Changeling that I would recommend with George C. Scott. Yes, watch The Changeling and then think that's the guy who did Species 2 later on, and you'll probably find it incredibly damn funny. From a film like that to Species 2.
The sequel fell into the trap that many sequels do, and that was to ramp up many of the exploitative qualities of the original. So the sequel had more nudity, more violence, more special effects, and yes, I'll do a full video about it in the future. The series so far has spawned 3 sequels. The first 2 movies were in theaters, and the last 2 were direct-to-video. Henstridge only had a cameo in part 3, and she said she was paid as much for the cameo as she was for the entirety of the first film. Acting was great for Henstridge, and she was happy to never model again. Donaldson liked Andrei Barkoviak so much, they did 2 more films together, Dante's Peak and 13 Days. There was a big learning curve with the visual effects and Species, and Donaldson took much of what he learned here into Dante's Peak. He also married his assistant, Marlee Schneider. Species is a genuinely unique sci-fi movie.
Yes, honey, remember when I had you go there and be a random woman that a hot naked blonde runs into your car naked, abducts you, then throws your body in the back of a car that she blows up? Yes, that's how we met.
It skirts the line of serious sci-fi thriller with occasional spouts of exploitation. The director didn't want this to be a straight-up horror film. He understood that there needed to be some gore, but he wanted to balance out the sexiness with the violence. He wanted it to play more like a horror thriller. And with that in mind, I think he succeeded. I thought the concept was a very good one, with the aliens arriving on Earth through information instead of a spaceship or other means. I also think most of the effects held up well. The CG is extremely dated, especially the full body puppet. There are a few shots that are obvious CG, but still look good, like when Syl's watching the team and transforms to get away. It's important to remember this cost half the price of Jurassic Park. And while some things didn't hold up well, the technology they developed is still in use today. I also love Giger's design of the character, and all his creations like the Ghost Train. It's a movie that feels like a showcase of many of the artist's works. Henstridge is stunning, and it's easy to see why the director fought so hard for her to be in the picture. The other actors held their own, and I liked seeing Madsen in a very rare turn as a good guy. Forrest Whitaker was also terrific as the empath, so I was sad he didn't return for the sequel.
Once again, the only other time most people have seen him play a good guy was in Free Willy.
Although they kind of melded his part into Henstridge, as they brought her back as Eve, the good clone of Syl, in order to track down Patrick, the male alien in 2. As much as I like the film, I still don't know if Donaldson was the right choice to direct. I also wonder what the film would have been like if they stuck closer to the original script. It's difficult to think of Species as hard sci-fi, Well, that's what it originally was. Although if it would have gone that route, it most likely would have been one and done rather than an entire franchise. I do think it would have been better if they stuck closer to more of Giger's ideas. Initially, when I read Giger's concept on Still Glowing, I thought it was ridiculous. However, I now
And let's also not forget about, this R-rated B movie with a studio budget, this sci-fi Shannon Tweed movie that got a studio budget somehow. After, like I said, after the success of Tremors, it was like every few years or so, the kind of movie that would have been made by Roger Corman somehow got a green light from a major studio that gave it, big special effects for the time and talented character actors to really make it above that kind of, video store rental thing. And Species was most definitely one of them. Take that, give it more generic, cheap special effects, and I could have seen a Julie Strain or a Shannon Weary or a Kira Reed or a Shannon Tweed starring in, Species as a late night Cinemax thing or as a straight to video kind of thing that would air a lot on Cinemax. Man, that monster didn't look like something from Species. I've still never seen Species 3. I saw it when it first aired. Unfortunately, I was stupid enough to be so eager to see it that I saw it on the Sci-Fi Channel when it aired there first. And yeah, it occurred to me that none of the titties would be in there. I'd have to wait until it got put on DVD. Which then, yes. Because yes, I have seen all Species movies. Yes, that's how much of the franchise, that's how much I love the franchise. That's how much I love having the Scream Factory Blu-ray release edition of Species, but wish I also had the Scream Factory edition of Species 2 that I don't have, but I wish I did. Yes, because we're seeing Species 2 be advertised on TV and in theaters, and then seeing it in video stores everywhere. For years upon years, I wanted to see it, and then finally it was worth the wait when I finally did get to see it. And whoa. Nick just gifted 10, count them, 10 channel memberships. Ho, 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 it's Christmas in March. Oh, let's see. Orville Nation, Gerald Armstrong, 5646, Genji X1D87N, Kalian Loki, Pat Lang /UK, Let's Go, Outside in the Sunshine, Broster, Villenend, Savage Talk, and Pinochet's Helicopter Tours all just got channel memberships right then, right there, right now. Yes, right here, right now. Making it rain for sure. And yes, we got Donnie here as well. Oh, yeah, yes, you should say more phenomenal. Well, considering that with the big money and the big hype in the summer of '95 was behind the return of James Bond with GoldenEye, Batman Forever, where how if you were alive in '95, you could have lived in a third world country and you'll still probably remember the Batman Forever marketing. And also the Power Rangers movie and Apollo 13. And then in comes this sci-fi Shannon Tweed film with a studio budget that held its own at the box office in the summer against movies like that. Yes, Cinemax or Skinemax, am I right? Yes. RJ says, not that I know who that Kira lady is, but she would have been a good fit, I imagine. Well, after this and with the success of the X-Files, the Showtime, Cinemax late night people did start producing a series of films called The Sex Files, and the first couple did star her, and the first one is very much like if a softcore parody of Mulder and Scully were going after the species alien. And of course, it happens to involve an alien entity, fungus creature that winds up taking over a woman who discovers it from outer space. It makes her incredibly horny, and it turns her into a female Harvey Weinstein that drains the balls of all the men she compulsively fucks, and then takes the form of all the women she fucks as a clever way for it to disguise to disguise herself. And there's even one moment where the Kira Reed, as the softcore Scully stand-in, fights the little lady, winds up taking her form. So then, because of how also in this movie there is a psychic sexual link between this alien fungus horny lady creature and the women it assumes the form of, when Kira Reed in the alien form fucks a guy silly in the kitchen in the back of a diner, she's asleep in bed in the motel and starts moaning and groaning and masturbating and ripping her top open and coming like a hurricane. And I do have an issue of Femme Fatales magazine that has a cover story on the first few Sex Files movies. Where, yes, that actress Curie talks about how that wild, crazy sex scene where she's in the form of the alien woman and having the wild, crazy fucking in the back of the kitchen, in the diner's kitchen, how she loved doing that because it was just all two cameras in one wild take where her and her co-star got to be very, very dirty. Yes, I'm not joking. Yes, there's Sex Files Alien Erotica. That is the name of the one with that scene in there. And then there was Sex Files Alien Erotica 2. Then there was other ones that all had Sex Files in it, but different subtitles, like Ancient Erotica, and also ones involving ghosts and all that. And Nick says, I gotta go. Everyone have a good night. All right, well, everybody wishing Nick a good night right there. That is great. That is great. That is great. And Trevor says, Sex Files, and I want to go railed. Yes, check it out. Check it out. Check it out. Because if you liked Species, well, remember what I said about how in another world you could take the same script of Species but give it to like a softcore actress like a Julie Strain or a Kira Reed, and with cheaper special effects to make it quickly and put it, on video or on the Playboy channel or on Cinemax. Well, the Sex Files Alien Erotica basically is that. Damn, son, that's crazy. Yes, and it's worth it. Yeah, the first time we see that, we get to see this alien entity, this female alien sex creature fungus, we see it take the form of the lady scientist, that it shoots a puff of smoke in her face to make her so horny she starts ripping her clothes off, and she's jilling off like mad on a bed that also happens to be in this laboratory room of hers. And then that's when we see the alien entity split off from her and has assumed her form. Then, after she fucks the captain, the male captain, into a coma, she then goes into the weight room where there's this one lady there who she starts fingering and fingering and fingering to the point where then she orgasms intensely and winds up taking that woman's new form. And on and on and on, that process goes between, mounting men like crazy and also going after women to then assume their form too. Until it turns out that there was a previous space exploration mission where there was this weird alien sex fungus thing they came into contact that, then it wound up taking over one of the men aboard, who then wound up leaving the astronaut corps and has been hiding. And it turns out, yes, that man actually was a male version of that alien sex fungus that took over the man's form. And when it crashed on Earth, it wound up just retreating into the wilderness, waiting for his female counterpart, his mate, to eventually come to Earth, which he did. And yes, the ending of the first Sex Files movie is of that horny alien lady fungus in her final form of a random lady hiker she went down on, but not before she also goes and has a three-way with a couple of men in that cave, goes into the cave, and then her and her male fungus man wind up doing it in front of the Mulder and Scully stand-ins while they get increasingly wetter and covered in some type of weird jelly until eventually they turn back into a shared fungus form and launch themselves back into space like some kind of fungus-based soft-core version of the ending to Life Force. And yes, Life Force is one of my favorite films of all time and one of the best things that Canon Films ever produced back in the 80s. And because of what that movie is like, which was basically the 80s prototype to Species, well, now you can look at that and see, well, now you understand why they had to go to France to find an actress to play the space girl in Life Force.
Understand what he was going for, and I think it could have worked and would have been really cool. I think he gave them enough ideas that would have made the film stand in a different light than Alien, but as it is now, it's hard to deny that it doesn't share more than a few similarities to the landmark sci-fi property. Giger disagreed with the producer's insistence on getting a non-horror director to helm the project. He thought a horror specialist would have suited the production better. Again, I agree. I also think a more horror-centric director would have tried to implement more of Giger's ideas. Although since Donaldson chose Giger, if the studio picked a different director, Giger never would have been involved. Neither would Henstridge. With those three gone, who knows what the movie might have been? Some folks complain about plot holes, but the only one that got me was this. Syl kills the conductor, and not only does her outfit fit perfectly,
An attractive heterosexual alien woman that gets repeatedly naked and having sex with men, that automatically enough would make this movie be impossible to get made today unless it involved Sydney Sweeney. But then on top of that, she winds up killing and taking the clothes and money off of a black woman. Speaking of, something that most especially would anger the social justice dogmatic cunts who are professionally pretending that they actually were watching Starfleet Academy.
even though the two women are of very different shapes and sizes, but it's somehow not covered in Cocoon Goop. Species is one of the most memorable action sci-fi films from the 90s. I think it was a movie that was at war with itself. It started off as hard sci-fi, then made more mainstream by a non-genre director, and then some studio decisions that kept pushing it to be like its big brother Alien, instead of completely its own thing. Many of the complaints were, as Giger predicted, that the film bore more than a few similarities to Alien, which is a shame. It's a unique enough idea, and while an alien trying to breed on Earth isn't a new idea, the way it was presented was. I remember when the film first came out, and it was a big deal. It may not have made as much as Stargate for MGM, but it was the hit the company needed and helped to keep them going. They pushed the envelope for CG at the time.
And also, I think it would have been difficult for MGM to wind up translating that franchise, the species, into a 10-year running show on Showtime and then the Sci-Fi Channel, and then 2 different spin-off shows on the Sci-Fi Channel, like MGM did with Stargate. Yeah, there's no possible way that the concept behind Species could have been done for TV. Unless it was some kind of one season thing, around the tail end of when Cinemax was still doing that softcore programming, they did have a sci-fi show called Forbidden Science that only lasted a season. But if you could track it down on, websites with X or Hub in the title, yeah, it's a good watch. Yes, that's about as close as we got to seeing Species as a TV show. And even then, it's about, cloning. It's like a high-tech company where it's, sex robots and clones and stuff like that instead of, aliens. But still, it's, soft-core science fiction. Like something I would probably wind up writing or drawing in the future.
Were able to do some things that were incredibly inventive on their relatively small budget. I also like that Natasha Henstridge is still proud of the film and appreciative of what started her acting career. Some actresses are ashamed of their early works, but
if only the likes of Scarlett Johansson would be less hypocritical about owing her career to her body as Natasha Henstridge is. Maybe that's what makes Henstridge more approachable as opposed to ScarJo, who, puts on that IMAX screen wide fake smile whenever she's in front of any camera that's not a film camera, and she's trying to pretend that she actually is happy to be around anybody.
But she still has a good sense of humor about it.
How's the alarm coming? It probably would have been a little bit better to do this at night.
Hey guys, Species is on cable.
This year marks the 25th anniversary of the film. Although nothing reminds me that we're all getting old, like seeing Natasha Henstridge, who is 19 in Species, is now on TV playing a mom.
Let's see. And speaking of Life Force, this one's shorter because it was earlier in the life of, this video, 10 years old.
The future of soda is now. Poppy, soda's back, but better.
When I tell you that I give it my all, I give it my absolute all to give my clients the life that
In the early 80s, Canon Films, specifically the producer duo of Golan Globus, was churning out dozens of low-budget action and exploitation films. They were an independent studio looking to move into blockbuster territory, so they took a huge gamble by investing $23 million into the adaptation of the novel Space Vampires. If you're laughing over the title, just remember that one of the most important science fiction movies of all time, Blade Runner, is based off a short story called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Tobe Hooper, the director of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, had just finished doing the massive hit Poltergeist in 1982. He was friends with producer Boaz Davidson, who recommended him to Menachem Golan as the person to helm Space Vampires. Hooper had a meeting with Golan, who gave him a copy of the book and said, "You do this movie." Hooper read it and thought it was fantastic. He'd been doing nothing but horror up to this point, and was overjoyed at the prospect of directing a sci-fi movie. Seeing the potential of working with Hooper, Cannon signed him to a 3-picture deal. Hooper worked briefly with writer Dan O'Bannon on Return of the Living Dead, but left the film, and O'Bannon took over as director. Considering O'Bannon wrote the screenplay for Alien, Hooper knew it'd be perfect to write Space Vampires. He wanted the movie to be a sci-fi version of an ancient siren tale, and a metaphor for the saying, "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned." While Marilyn Burns was working on Helter Skelter, Hooper stopped by the set often to visit. She introduced him to her co-star, Stephen Railsback. Railsback did an amazing job as Charles Manson, and Hooper always wanted to work with him. After seeing him in The Stuntman, he offered him the lead in Space Vampires. Railsback accepted, excited because he never did a sci-fi movie before. The biggest problem they had was finding an actress for the lead vampire, simply known as Space Girl. Producer Menachem Golan was pretty hands-off with the production, with one exception. He insisted the Space Girl be nude the entire film. This posed a major problem because none of the actresses they interviewed were comfortable in doing so. Finally, after seeing hundreds of actresses, they met 19-year-old French actress Mathilde May. May was an ex-ballerina who had only recently gotten into acting. She was nervous about the nudity, but her agent convinced her to do the role because it would be huge for her career. She accepted, but there was another problem. She didn't speak English. Since it was a while before filming began, she was able to learn her lines phonetically. The second vampire was Christopher Jagger, the brother of Mick Jagger. Hooper directed Billy Idol's music video, Dancing with Myself, and wanted him to play the third vampire. Unfortunately, he was too busy touring, and his schedule wouldn't allow it. Wanting to make this more than just another sci-fi film, they began to hire some major talent within the industry. They hired special effects wizard John Dykstra, a 2-time Oscar winner, one for Star Wars, and the other for developing the Dykstra Flex camera. They hired most of the crew from 2001: A Space Odyssey, including Oscar-nominated production designer John Graysmark. Nick Maley was the makeup effects supervisor on the film. He said that while he's most proud and well known for his work on Yoda in Star Wars, Life Force was his best work. Finally, they brought in Alan Hume. He was the DOP on numerous Bond films, as well as Return of the Jedi. With this amazing group of talented people and the largest budget Cannon ever had, they set off to make Space Vampires. Only Hooper had hated the title. They had a B-list title for an A-list project. It sounded too much like what people would expect from a Cannon film. Wanting to sound more grandiose, they changed it to Life Force, which admittedly sounds much better for this type of film. The movie was about a group of astronauts that unknowingly unleash a trio of space vampires on Earth. The leader, known only as Space Girl, is unstoppable. She drains the life of any man or woman she encounters, which starts a chain reaction that'll destroy all humanity on Earth. In the book, the alien ship was found in the asteroid belt. Hooper had the idea of having the ship hidden within Halley's Comet, since the comet would be passing Earth shortly after the film was to be released. Also, because in ancient times, Halley's Comet was seen as a harbinger of doom. The shoot was going to be long, 120 days, 6 months of filming. They needed that much time because some of the scenes, like the astronauts flying into and around the spaceship, took days just to get a few seconds. This was back in the day when there was no such thing as wire removal, so they had to be creative with their camera angles to conceal them. The rig they used was the same one from the film Superman, that suspended them 40 feet in the air. The problem was, if one of the actors moved the wrong way, it would start a pendulum effect that would only get worse. On numerous occasions, they had to stop filming because one or more of the actors threw up in their suit. They took over 2 of the largest sound stages in London, one where they filmed Star Wars, and the other known as the 007 stage. The sets they built were enormous. While there was some green screen compositing work with the astronauts flying into the spaceship, the interiors were all real. Dykstra modeled the alien ship after, of all things, an artichoke. They wanted the alien ship to appear to be alive, so they had the astronauts flying in through giant veins. Since Hooper had a love for horror, he incorporated elements of that into the movie. Being that at its core it was a vampire film, he made a sort of Hammer sci-fi film by adding things of a gothic nature, such as the leaded iron sword and possession. Patrick Stewart had a small part as Dr. Armstrong. Along with Excalibur and Dune, this was one of the largest productions he had been involved with at that point. Years later, he was on The Tonight Show and was asked who his first on-screen kiss was. He laughed and said it was Stephen Railsback. Stewart had said of all the people over the years, Hooper was his favorite director to work with. The three vampires in the clear coffins were actually full body cast mannequins for the wide shots. This was so they didn't have to worry about having the actors standing inside for hours. The streets of London were all sets, and some of the destruction was done with miniatures composited in via green screen. The theme park, Tuctonia, had a scale replica of London. They were allowed to film there as long as they didn't damage any of the city, so all the buildings that blew up were ones that they brought in. The crew called the dehydrated victims of the space vampires the Walking Shriveled. The man and the woman in the base were both animatronic and took 23 puppeteers to control. All the cables ran up from underneath the table into the puppet, and they watched the movements from a monitor out of frame. It took days to animate each one. May was nude for the 100 of the 120-day shoot, even though her on-screen time only counts for about 7 minutes of film. Initially, she was nervous and embarrassed about being nude, but quickly got over it. The only time when it was difficult was the outdoor scene, since they were filming in winter, and it was well below zero.
This is Next Dimensional, and I've been on SoundCloud for over a decade. At first I was just a fan, then I started making my own stuff. I'm distributing my next EP with SoundCloud to every major platform. They don't take a fee on my tracks, SoundCloud pays out 100% of my royalties. I can connect with my community, I can get messages from fans.
In the scene where she escapes the installation, there was a crew member behind this tree waiting for her with a blanket. With May's background in ballet, it made her movements eerily perfect and added to her performance. She was stunning, but her poise and stoic expression let you know that something was amiss. Well, that and that she was a completely nude woman wandering around a military base. For the helicopter scene, they had to cover May in a latex suit and encase her in plastic veins and a syrup like blood. The process of getting her into the suit took 8 hours. When the guard dies the second time, they had a life-size dummy with hoses that sucked all the air out, which made him appear to deflate in front of them. When Hooper was younger, he got in an accident on an ATV where his hand was caught between the handlebar and a cinder block wall. When he took his hand out, it tore the skin off, which inspired him to do this scene. The light flying around London was a 10K light bulb suspended by a wire that Dykstra concealed with optical effects. There were hundreds of the Walking Shriveled all around the streets at the end. The production was huge. Golan was sure this was going to be the film of the year. It clearly was another level of filmmaking, and every bit as epic as Hooper wanted it to be. After a grueling 6-month shoot, the film wrapped. Hooper assembled his director's cut, which was almost 2 hours long. Golan said it was fine for the release in the UK, but it wouldn't go over well in the US unless it was shorter. Hooper supervised the edit, and the US theatrical cut was trimmed of about 20 minutes. When the film was released in the US, it flopped. While it did open in 4th place, it was going up against The Goonies, Rambo, and Cocoon, all 3 of which were in the top 10 highest grossing films of the year. So it did have the deck stacked against it. Meanwhile, the full uncut version was released in England, where it was much more successful. The US cut removed the amazing opening.
And yes, of course, how Cocoon did better at the box office that year, and it was one of the few times that a science fiction performance got an Oscar win before the post-Trump Hollywood now started firing Oscars at any genre picture so long as it's suffused with social justice dogma. I'm looking at you, Michael B. Jordan in Sinners. So you've got the family-friendly version of a movie that has a hot naked alien lady in it. Because as you remember, Cocoon, despite all the old people in it, also had Raquel Welch's daughter as a sexy naked alien lady. But that was the big budget effects-driven sci-fi film with the naked lady in it that you could take the family to, and then the parents can go and cover the eyes of their kids whenever Tommy Welch is nude. But the one from Canon Films, from the director of Poltergeist and the writer of Alien, as they advertised on all the posters, yeah, that didn't work. That wasn't going to work. Yes, and it was a tough break having to compete with Rambo, First Blood Part 2, and The Goonies at the same time as well. I mean, ouch. Kicking the balls.
The score by Henry Mancini, which perfectly set the tone of the film. Listen to this.
Now, doesn't that opening sound like NFL films in space? I'm not the only one that hears the opening to the longer cut of Life Force that was only shown in European theaters when it first came out, but since then has just become the standard cut of the film that you see when you buy the Blu-ray, or if you watch it on Tubi even, or when it would air on TV or on digital cable or whatever, or basic or premium cable or whatever. It would be that longer version that, yes, has this, elaborate shot of the moon that sounds like NFL films in space. And yes, both for Eva and RJ, I haven't been hearing things all this time. This doesn't sound like the movie about a hot, naked French space vampire girl is opening like it's a documentary about the first Super Bowl on the moon.
Versus this.
Although, to be fair, that opening for the recut version for American theaters, that does still sound like a horror film. It still sounds sinister. It's memorable differently, but yes, the NFL films in space does better. And it, like that, with the logo flying at you, does fit. It fits the tone of the movie better. It reminds me of what Leonard Maltin said about the film when Leonard Maltin gave Life Force a rave review when it was first in theaters, where he's like, my God, did somebody get the license plate on that movie? One of those weird examples of an 80s genre film that a mainstream critic actually liked. That was very rare. Go back and look at, Leonard Maltin or Siskel and Ebert, how much those big 80s genre films they hated more often than not. It was like when Siskel and Ebert praised From Beyond when that was put in theaters. From Beyond and Reanimator. There's something about that film, about that director, what his breakout horror comedies that they liked, than most other genre films like that, especially Life Force and all that, they probably shit on. Unless, of course, it had Lucas or Spielberg attached to it. I guess that's why Siskel and Ebert hated The Goonies when it came out, because it was only, Steven Spielberg's name above the title as an executive producer. If Spielberg had actually directed The Goonies, like probably a lot of people think he did, then probably critics of the time would have loved it. But hey, it actually made money anyway. And if you look back at the decade, one of the few beloved genre films of that time that actually was financially successful in theaters. You go back and look back at your favorite 80s movies, and a lot of them did a lot worse financially than you would have thought. But then they found their audience through renting at Blockbuster or your local family-owned video store, or seeing it on HBO or Cinemax or on basic cable.
Kind of underwhelming compared to the original, don't you think? Then it severely truncated the opening, reducing the introduction of the crew of the Shuttle Churchill and their mission down to a text crawl.
Looking for tax help? Now there are TurboTax experts right in your neighborhood. They get to know your unique situation and get you every dollar.
The whole beginning feels like it's in way too much of a hurry to get to the aliens. They also drastically reduced the violence and nudity. After the movie, Hooper made his two other canon films, the remake of Invaders from Mars, and the completely off-the-wall Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Hooper enjoyed his time working with Cannon, and would most likely be still making films for them had they not gone out of business. Life Force is exactly what director Tobe Hooper set out to make, an epic sci-fi film. Cannon took a huge risk in making such an expensive picture, and while it failed on a box office level, it succeeded in being one of the most unique sci-fi films of all time. After almost 30 years, the film has been restored to its full glory for its Blu-ray release. People in the US can finally see Hooper's complete vision as it was intended. The amazing visuals, the outstanding practical effects, the unique story, and the incredible explosive finale were, and still are, monumental. This is a landmark film in Cannon's catalog, and I feel if they had released the director's cut in the US, it would have greatly helped to cement them as more than just a schlock factory. Also, how awesome is this poster? The director's cut returns the film to its massive scale. It feels like the apocalyptic tale that it always was, instead of the confused sprint to the finish line of the US theatrical cut. This is an incredible sci-fi film that deserves way more credit than it gets. Not to mention Matilda May's performance. Some see her role simply as naked chick who walks around, but she owned the role. She exuded confidence.
And well, because, she was a hot naked chick in a movie that, men like to see her naked in, I'm pretty sure all kinds of SJW types would hate the No Life Force and hate her for being in the movie, but then would be the type that would go and defend her role in the Spanish prototype to Cuties in the early 90s called The Tit and the Moon. Yes, there was a Spanish film in the 90s called The Tit and the Moon about a little boy who wants to go and breastfeed again. And then Matilda May comes into town as the wife of a circus performer that does a circus act with him who lactates. And this little boy winds up getting her to breastfeed him. Yes, I'm not kidding. And the movie ends with this big Matador event that happens where from a balcony, he sees Matilda May and she pulls out one of her tits and he winds up, that's what gives the boy the motivation to fight through the crowd at this bullfighting event to get up on there and get nursed by Matilda May in front of everybody. And then the happy ending is then finally his mother goes and also breastfeeds him again. Yes, so he basically you're seeing a preteen boy have a lactation three-way with his own mother and this girl from Life Force. But in the way I just described it, we know Vito Gesualdi would probably buy 14 copies of it and praise it as brilliant art and say that liking this, pedo bait is freedom of speech. From the same guy who tried to get Nerdrotic deplatformed from YouTube for the crime of having Alex Jones on a Friday Night Tights stream once. Then you wonder why, no matter how much of a degenerate failure as a human being Nick Rekieta has proven himself to be, he will always be right and will always be superior to Vito Gesualdi when calling him as a subhuman, hypocritical piece of pond scum that Vito has always been, and why I would love to see him get a bullet to the face on live TV one day.
And you had no problem believing she'd be able to conquer the mind of any man. Well, maybe not the guy who tries to lure her in with a cookie.
I know, especially right now, I'm not the only guy who, whenever the thought of Vito Gesualdi comes to mind, I would love to do an impersonation that would involve, Vito, you support trainees and all that. Well, how about this? We do a little training experiment where you pretend you're Lana Clarkson and I'm Phil Spector locked and loaded.
No, that's why we noticed it. She was with a dark-haired girl. Real good-looking bird, no. Didn't have a lot of clothes on either. We thought they might be, well, Yes.
Hi, welcome to Brandon's Cult Reviews, a show dedicated to strange...
Oh. Let's keep this in the realm of good bad flicks. Oh yeah, that was a video from a while back, but yes, hello there, the Alpha Proto that this channel did. Like I said, this channel has been going since like the late 2000s and has continued and continued and continued. This is the channel that may not be some big, gold plaque having million sub channel or whatever that has big, endorsement deals or anything, but it's a matter of having an actual idea and actual content that is actually going to keep the audience maintained and coming for more, and knowing this is somebody that is actually not an insane freak. Hence why a channel like this has been going since I was still in high school, and is going to be going and going for the foreseeable future. Unlike the aforementioned Nick Rekieta.
Controversy sells. Most filmmakers don't go into a project with the intention of kicking the proverbial hornet's nest, but sometimes that ends up being the result. The Passion of the Christ pissed off both religious and anti-religious folks, as well as the critics, one of which dubbed the movie the Jesus Chainsaw Massacre. After hearing how brutal it was, legions of people flocked to the theater to see the movie they were told not to see. Because of the outrage, it spent 4 weeks at the #1 spot and went on to gross over $611 million worldwide. Controversy can backfire, too. Take one Super Bowl halftime show, add Janet Jackson's nipple in a slow news day, and you get Nipplegate. Sometimes controversy can make a film infamous, which is what happened to the 1984 horror slasher, Silent Night, Deadly Night. In the early 80s, producer Scott Schneed received a screenplay from a college student named Paul Kamey. It was called He Sees You When You're Sleeping and was about a killer Santa. Schneed thought the screenplay was awful, but he liked the idea of a killer Santa. He optioned the idea and hired writer Michael Hickey to take the Killer Santa idea and write something completely different from what they were given. Slasher movies were huge in the 80s, so they had no problem getting the $1 million they had budgeted for the film. The original title they went with was Sleigh Ride, and it was to be produced and distributed by TriStar. Michael Hickey wasn't a fan of slasher movies, which actually ended up helping the writing of the film a great deal. Instead of falling into the usual horror movie cliches, he had the script play out quite differently. Most slashers would go through a fairly large body count, and then towards the end they'd briefly explain the killer and his or her motivations. They spend more time getting to know the victims than the killer. With Sleigh Ride, they spent the first half hour of the movie showing what Billy went through and what would eventually drive him over the edge. There was more character development of the killer than the vast majority of slashers. While many slashers concentrated on the victims, Sleigh Ride would focus on the killer. The victims were almost inconsequential. In 1972, there was a segment in the horror anthology, Tales from the Crypt, that had a killer Santa. Then again in 1980, there was Christmas Evil, another killer Santa movie. There was no uproar about either of those, so the producers weren't even considering it an issue. They were more concerned that people would be offended by the portrayal of the Catholic Church and the evil Mother Superior. Halloween had come out years earlier, and Schneed was looking for a young up-and-coming director, potentially the next John Carpenter. They interviewed many young directors, one of which was a then 25-year-old Sam Raimi, but the studio didn't like any of them. For some odd reason, they went with Charles Sellier. He was a producer-director who was the creator of the long-running Grizzly Adams series, as well as various religious films, like In Search of Noah's Ark and In Search of Historic Jesus. Not exactly someone you would think would be interested in shooting a film about a killer Santa Claus. Schneed protested because he was looking for some new blood with new ideas, and Sellier was in his 40s and had already been in the industry for a long time. The studio insisted and hired Sellier for the job. They shot the film in March in Utah over the course of 30 days. They tried to do as many exterior shots as they could first, before all the snow had melted. For the toy store, they made Ira's Toys, named after Ira Barmak, one of the producers. While composer Perry Botkin did the score, they had Morgan Ames create 10 Christmas-themed songs for the movie. They intended on releasing the soundtrack to go along with the wide release of the film. The film's editor, Michael Spence, was also the second unit director. While working on the film, they ran into a problem. Sellier was uncomfortable shooting the death scenes, so Spence stepped in to do them properly. After filming and post-work was done, the studio had a test screening. Since the film was developed in the days when slashers were big money, they never even considered the killer Santa angle would be considered blasphemous. The film was aimed at a teen audience, so the test screening was all teens. Not surprisingly, they loved the movie, and TriStar decided to have a limited release in November, and if it did well enough, they'd move it to a wide release closer to Christmas. Shortly before its release, the studio changed the name of the movie from Sleigh Ride to Silent Night, Deadly Night. The movie opened the same weekend as the original A Nightmare on Elm Street, and it outpaced it. Even in its limited release, the movie was already a hit. But then, controversy struck. Trailers for the film ran during a football game in prime time, which sent mothers through the roof.
And they say on the commercial that it only looks like Santa Claus, but to a child, there is only one Santa Claus.
The PTA was protesting the film, as well as a group called Mothers Against Movie Madness. Instead of turning off the TV or having a conversation with their kids, many parents called the studio to complain and picketed the film. Most likely a slow news day caused what happened next. Local news stations interviewed the angry parents, and even though the film hadn't moved to a wide release, the story of the protests spread across the country.
We're not out to do this to be famous or anything. We're out to get the movie taken out of the theater.
Entertainment Tonight did a story about it, and Phil Donahue did as well. The whole thing turned into a media circus. The second week, the movie did even better at the box office. The film was in less than 1/4 of the country, but it pulled in $4.2 million. With these numbers, they estimated if the film made it to a wide release, it would pull in at least $20 million. Looking at that kind of return, TriStar was moving towards the wide release. During this time, the protests intensified, emboldened by the constant media frenzy, which only drew more attention to the film. Siskel and Ebert gave it a scathing review and called out the studio, producers, and everyone involved.
So let's repeat the names of the people who did it. TriStar Pictures, co-owned by Columbia Pictures, CBS, and Home Box Office. Shame on you. So let me repeat the names of the writer and director and producers of this film. Michael Hickey wrote the film, Charles E. Sellier Jr. directed it, and Ira Richard Barmack produced it. You people have nothing to be proud of, even if you made a few bucks off of all the negative publicity. Your profits truly are blood money.
And these are from the same fart-huffing homunculi critics who for decades they were offended by this movie and all the other slasher movies at the time from these same assholes that call gay socialist torture porn like Sallow a work of art. Yes, that film based off of the Marquis de Sade story, where a bunch of rich libertines get prostitutes, soldiers, and abduct a bunch of underage boys and girls, take them to an island, and rape and mutilate and murder them for 120 days, and make them eat their own shit and broken glass. That was a work of art. Did I mention that after that film was released, the director tried to rape an underage boy, and the underage boy defended himself by running him over with his own car? Since then, fake news merchants like The Guardian have been trying to lie retroactively about how, he wasn't assaulting a boy, he was murdered by homophobic mobsters. No, you're lying. The Guardian and the rest of the assholes promulgating that lie have never told the truth in their entire life. He was a socialist pervert, child rapist, who made a whole movie about socialist child rape and called it art. So it's a matter of you want to go and defend and lie about the history of this socialist pervert. But now keep on going back to how Silent Night, Deadly Night's producers and director and writers, all of them have nothing to be proud of, and what they made was blood money. Fuck you.
They went on to imply that much like I Spit on Your Grave, the movie should never have been made. Here are some quotes from the height of the outrage. "Something has to be done. It's so ghoulish to do this near the holidays. The little children are the ones who are hurt. It's an invasion of children's dreams and fantasies. It's a form of child abuse. It hurts my brain to think that an actual adult said that."
Do I have to go and repeat my description of the contents of the film Sallow, which the same type of film critics not only worship and have worshipped for 50 years, but will gladly drop a water bill's amount of money or a power bill's amount of money on a reissue of the Criterion Blu-ray of that film? And yes, no one is taking kids to these movies. If you're an unattentive, shitty parent, then these kids might go and wind up stealing these movies from a video store, getting like an older friend or like an older brother of a friend to rent these movies for them, or they'll go and, watch them when you're not looking on TV. But yeah, taking them to these movies, no. No one is taking these kids to these movies. Although knowing these type of deranged, sick fucks that will jump in front of bullets to defend the pedal porn peddling teachers and Democrat-controlled cities and public schools would be the kind of people that would probably want to go and take kindergartners to go see a movie like Sallow or Cuties or the aforementioned The Tit and the Moon.
How about this one from a former mayor in Connecticut? "I'm not one for censorship. I believe in free speech, free expression. But Christmas is sacred. To make one of these killer movies with Christmas and Santa Claus as the theme, that's going too far." So what he's saying is you're allowed to create whatever you want unless I disagree with it. If you don't like something, no one's forcing you to watch it, play it, whatever. What then gives you the right to tell other adults what they're allowed to do?
Which, the fake tolerant, fake free speech loving left of the whole free speech movement of the 60s have proven themselves to be the hypocritical Marxist agitators they always were by whenever those types are talking about free speech, what they're really saying is the right to not question or challenge my thinly veiled Lenin worship and my desire to subvert people that don't agree with me. And now all the same people that were all the generation that wants to flash freeze their entire existence into 1967 and their inbred offspring that want to be flash frozen into 2003 are the same type of assholes that now are the people that perfected cancel culture. In case you wonder why cancel culture has such irrefutably communist roots. Yes, but in this case means ignore what I said before. Here are the words I mean. Yes, just like Anita Sarkeesian. Maybe Sarkeesian and Siskel have some, relationship. In case now, if you want any more of a reason to go and rewatch the underrated 90s Christmas movie, The Ref, and enjoy the subplot about the protagonist's son being in military school, where he is blackmailing the colonel in charge of the military school because he photographed the colonel cheating on his wife. And the colonel is named Siskel, which the screenwriter Richard LaGravenese actively copped to, how he named this character Siskel after Gene as revenge on Gene Siskel giving a negative review to his film The Fisher King that he wrote. Because yes, Gene Siskel eats shit.
We're out to get the movie taken out of the theater.
Keeping R-rated movies out of the hands of children? I absolutely agree. But that's the job of the rating system and parents. TriStar was owned by CBS, HBO, and Coke. When Coke got wind of the controversy, they went into full damage control. Coke was largely responsible for the reintroduction of Santa Claus that started with their very popular 1930s Christmas ads. They had Santa billboards all over, and now they were next to ads with Santa with an X. Fearing the backlash and how this movie might hurt their brand, they demanded that TriStar pull the movie from theaters. TriStar announced the reason they pulled the movie was because it wasn't commercially viable to give it a wide release. Bullshit. They also halted the film from its video release, so producer Ira Barmack had to buy the rights back from TriStar and make new deals in order to get it released on video. The film developed a following on home video, and years later, in 1987, Silent Night Deadly Night 2 was released on home video. Even if you haven't seen it, you know this part.
Garbage Day! Huh? No!
After that, there were 3 more sequels and a remake/reboot. Mickey Rooney was an actor who loudly protested the original movie, so it was fairly ironic that years later he was in such financial trouble, he agreed to star in Silent Night Deadly Night 5, The Toy Maker. The director, Charles Sellier, died in 2011, but in an interview before his passing, he had said that this was the worst thing he had ever done, and he hates the movie. This year is the 31st anniversary of the film. Despite all the controversy and troubles the film went through, it's arguably more popular now than it was back then. The movie's since been recognized as not only one of the best slasher movies, but one of the best horror movies ever made. Quentin Tarantino even owns his own print of the film and says it's one of his all-time favorite movies. One year at the Austin Film Festival, Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez reenacted the grandfather-grandson scene word for the audience. When the movie was pulled from theaters, the soundtrack was put on indefinite hold, despite being finished. To honor the 30th anniversary, the previously shelved soundtrack was given an official release. It's hard to say if a movie with a killer Santa would get as much flack now as it did back in 1984. There still are people out there that attack artists for their creations. There's a new generation out there that are offended by everything. They do nothing but bully and shame anyone who disagrees with them. Never give in to those who want to make...
Just exactly like what South Park has been doing for about a decade, but still, even people on the, anti-woke side of the aisle will still pretend that they were equal opportunity offenders, despite how, to be intellectually honest, the Stephen Colbert-produced Our Cartoon President spent more time making fun of the Obamas and the Clintons and people in the left-wing media like Wolf Blitzer or Rachel Maddow or Anderson Cooper than South Park has in almost 30 years on the air. And yes, the moral is critics are failed actors and screenwriters. And Alpha Proto says, I can see how kids seeing the Santa movie would make them scared of Santa, same as people scared of clowns after seeing It, or, the sharks after seeing Jaws, and the Jaws, the original summer blockbuster that then probably made, hell, even going to the toilet scary for people. Or this is actually a good one. No religion, no politics, no abuses, no sex, nothing about animals, nothing about humans. And then you have complete freedom to draw and express whatever you want. It sounds like that one monologue Stacy Keach has in Escape from LA, where he talks about all the rules in the country and all that under President Uncle Ben from the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, and he says, "Land of the free." Critters made going to the toilet scary. Oh, Ghoulies. Yes, Ghoulies, famously, which actually this same channel right here did a more recent exploring video about Ghoulies and talks about there being parents outraged about the film and its marketing and the Ghoulies popping out of the toilet and making kids afraid of the toilet. And now Stephen Colbert is writing a Lord of the Rings movie because, well, Hollywood still has to go out of its way to make sure that its most blatantly protected of communist agitprop bullshit merchants are continued to be employed in Hollywood, whether or not they have such little ratings that they now are getting kicked away from their network, like Colbert being kicked away from CBS eventually. So of course that means, well, what's going to happen now that his time with CBS is knocking on heaven's door? Well, he's got to go and do this. Well, of course, Disney, is dying with the BlackRock-funded lie, and they actually went out of their way to go and reinstate and cheer, Jimmy Kimmel coming back and pretending that he is some type of victim of censorship when he's never been a victim of anything in his entire life because he's too busy victimizing women with the 14 rapes in any given month he's guilty of.
Make art safe. Movies, TV, video games.
And what did I just say? And then at the same time, he goes and shows, if you go back and look at it, wait. Well, I just lost a metric ton of respect for this channel right here by showing that montage of photos and saying movies, and he shows the poster for Sallow. Yes, the gay socialist torture porn where that pretentious pervert director went and made a whole movie based off a Marquis de Sade story so he could sexually mutilate children. And then die when an underage boy he was trying to rape went and killed him in self-defense. And in case you wonder why, why those film critics say go fuck themselves, and well, this is one that, using this as an idea of, the film critics that want to say this is a work of art, if you thought Cuties was disturbing and that clearly it was political ideology fueled perversion that was making critics lie about the imaginary QAnon conspiracy, talking about how Cuties was pedo bait, well, picture the social media all around in the 70s and they would have been saying the exact same thing defending Sallow. Although maybe because mainstream media would have no grip on the American psyche or the world psyche of pop culture back in the 70s, then that means that the Marxist miasma of how Sallow is a brilliant work of art instead of just socialist gooner porn, we would have been able to see the forest through the trees, and it wouldn't have wound up actually getting taken seriously as some great work of art, like what it happened to Cuties, much to the eternal crying and pain and anguish of Movie Bob and Vito Gesualdi. Just saying. RJ says, I've nominated we stop playing the videos from him. Well, yeah. Well, we'll take that under advisement. Especially because right now, here in the middle of this comic where, the thing is, the fact of portraying, it's not of me portraying an angel who was captured by Spanish pervert libertines with their own religion built around the Marquis de Sade, and how they reward the most elite of those that they induct into their own little cult by giving them the chance to rape an angel that they've captured. It's the idea of capturing and raping an angel and building a religion around the picture of the Marquis de Sade they portrayed as a bad thing. That's what those Cuties and Sallow worshipping freaks would go and complain about. So here is page 20 in all of its glory. Now we're getting down to that home stretch with just another 4 pages to go, where we'll see how Fiona goes and rescues this angel from his capture, what her plan is for how exactly is she going to give him any kind of life, because, well, remember at the same time, an angel like this gentleman right here has been eternal, is an eternal creature. So 100 years of torture and rape and mutilation is more like, in the angel's sense of time, more like just, probably for a person, what would be like a few months. Just saying right there. And also the very, very beautiful comeuppance that all of the eyes wide shut lunatics at this party that Fiona has infiltrated are going to get, which are very, very fucking deserved. Hence why I say that, yes, Fiona is a villain, but, what makes her most definitely a suspension of disbelief stretching type of character is that she's a woman who's actually accepted responsibility and acknowledged that she has ever actually done anything wrong, that she has no one to blame but herself. And the fact that she is a villain who goes and is dedicated to exposing or destroying people that are far more heinous than her and are far more irredeemable and unforgivable than her. And if anything, going down and doing things like what she's doing in this issue and in previous issues is her attempt at redemption. Whereas Freva says, I mean, to hurt an angel, you have to be a special type of evil. Or, as probably the Marquis de Sade himself would think, why didn't I think of that and put that in a story? And put some, intellectually pretentious masturbatory rambling in between all the psychotic masturbatory fantasies I'm writing in the story. But because he was a depraved pervert who, masqueraded his narcissistic, deranged sex fantasies with a atheistic philosophy that's all about personal indulgence and narcissistic rage and sexual deviancy, of course, academia has been deifying him for years on end. For centuries now. From the same people who demand Harper Lee's work get removed from the curriculums in schools, but then will go and screech censorship, screech Nazis if parents get upset about child porn being given as required reading to their children in public schools. Yes, as RJ says, in a way, she borders on anti-hero, but the kind of anti-hero where, I'm reminded of Elric of Meln le Benet, and in particular, when Razorfist did his video introducing it was an introduction to Elric of Meln le Benet, and he talked about one of the top 5 Elric stories he recommended for newbies, talking about how this is the type of ending where where Elric's character and what Elric does and his thought process behind it shows that when it comes to most definite people who just characters that are described as anti-heroes are really just a white knight who makes a wisecrack or two and gets paid for it. RJ is definitely anything short of, Elric is definitely nothing close to a hero. He's one step short of being a villain. And yes, RJ most definitely in that Elric of Meln le Benet idea, I could see definitely Elric taking a look at a woman like Fiona and admiring her. And wondering if she's single. Yes, to capture, de-wing, and then repeatedly beat, mutilate, and rape an angel, you've got to be that special type of evil that only modern Hollywood and academia can defend, so long as you don't contradict their social justice dogma or anything Jimmy Kimmel's ever said in a monologue, instead of shooting Jimmy Kimmel in the fucking head on live TV like he deserves. And this is the last call, ladies and gentlemen. The last call for super chats, the last call for channel memberships, and the last call for donations into the store. Come on in and bring that in and make this all worth it. Because trust me, if you think this, I may be taking a break from making more issues of Encrypted until September, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to be brainstorming new ones and going and showing how, with this issue, you ain't seen nothing yet. When it comes to showing how, for a woman like Fiona, being a villain, being an anti-hero is her on a good day when she's feeling generous. But then again, when it comes to the type of people she is either exposing or destroying or subverting, this is most definitely an example of her being a hero by comparison, which is about as close to an actual hero that she would ever be as a character. Oh, yes. And also notice that the angel here doesn't have any eyebrows. That's just the brow line over there of him whinging. So until then, I want to thank you all for watching. Subscribe so the channel will reach 10,000 subs. Become a member today and shop my art store with the first link in the description, where you can buy my art or commission me, or you can support me directly with a donation, or go and buy my comic book, Encrypted, where you can buy a regular copy for $5, an autographed copy for $10, an autographed and sketched in copy for $20, or get a 1-year subscription to the comic for $60, or 1-year subscription with your copies autographed for $90. And tomorrow I'll have news shorts at 5 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 and 6. I'll have a new video at 6:30, and I will be live again at 10. So until then, felines, slam it, lick it, suck it, and see you, Space Cowboy.